It was a terribly rainy and cold day, but despite the bad weather, Robert confidently approached one of the bank branches with two sturdy black bags stuffed to the brim. Over the phone, he listened to his brother complain about his decision to sell the house and invest all the money into his business. Soon, Robert finally reached the bank's doors and entered, not at all surprised by the large crowd on such a rainy day. Cutting his brother off, he assured him that he would definitely succeed. But these words only fired up his brother even more, and without mincing words, he listed all the times Robert had failed in life, remaining a pathetic loser, and finally told him to forget about him because from that moment on, they were nothing to each other. This clear break of brotherly ties and the reminder of his own failures deeply hurt him. He couldn't respond, just pressed his lips together in regret. As soon as the call was dropped, his hand with the phone just limply fell. Robert had been bullied since childhood. Whenever he tried to skip classes, he was immediately caught and brought back, eventually graduating with the worst grades and failing to get into college. Because of this, he couldn't find a single place that would beg him to take a job. Robert's last hope was that maybe, just this once, something would go right for him. Suddenly, his number was called, and he was told to go to window number 3. But before our hero could even take a step, something weird happened. A blue system window popped up, announcing that the new world had finished loading. Prices were slashed by 1,000,000 times, but Robert's assets remained unchanged. Reading this, our hero was baffled. He looked around to see if anyone else was reacting and figured he must be hallucinating from his intense desire to succeed. With that thought, he approached the right window and, placing both bags on the counter, said he wanted to deposit some money. Alicia sighed with annoyance and reached for the bags in front of her, assuming there wouldn't be much money and it wouldn't take long to count. However, the moment she saw what was inside, her face showed a mix of surprise and confusion. From the bills inside, the girl realized she wasn't dealing with a poor man, as she had mistakenly thought. With a trembling voice full of excitement, she asked Robert how much he wanted to deposit, and the guy replied that he needed to put in $8,000. Alicia looked around hastily and, grabbing her phone, said that she couldn't help him with this and would therefore contact the head office. A few minutes later, a white foreign car pulled up to the bank building. Armed soldiers immediately rushed out of the cars that stopped nearby. In the circle of soldiers, our hero was awaited by a silver-haired man in a business suit who waved at Robert and told him to get in the car. Shocked and utterly confused, the young guy did what the man asked. As soon as he was inside, all the soldiers ran back and the cars started moving. Sitting inside the limousine with a bunch of armed soldiers, Robert felt extremely uncomfortable and still had no idea what was going on, especially since he just wanted to deposit a mere $8,000. Suddenly, in a small window, he noticed a sign for a deal where you could buy 10 cans of milk for the price of 1. Standing next to one of those signs, a guy was joyfully shouting into his phone that he had received a bonus of 5 fen. Listening to his conversation, Robert became even more confused, because that amount for a prize was ridiculously small. At that moment, he remembered the system window that had suddenly appeared in front of him at the bank and its contents. If he had previously dismissed it as a hallucination from stress, now he was more convinced that it was real. Suddenly, a man approached him, snapped him out of his thoughts, flashed a big smile, and introduced himself as an employee from the bank's main office. Robert didn't understand why he was being so polite, but decided it would be good to get on this guy's good side and asked how much his amazing suit cost. Before, he couldn't even dream of stepping into the lobby of the bank's main office. When Justin replied that his suit wasn't very expensive and cost only 2 fen, our hero was shocked to hear the price and asked with bewilderment if he was joking. But the man's reaction clearly showed he wasn't kidding. And this information convinced Robert even more that the prices in this world had really dropped. Thinking about how much the world had changed, he reached for one of the bags and pulled out a bill. Taking a closer look, Robert noticed that the bills were much thicker and not as easy to tear as before. Curious about what was inside the bill, he ripped it apart. This action shocked Justin to the core, who thought the rich had some weird hobbies. Tearing up limited edition bills like they were just regular paper, only available to those with a certain status. As they approached the building, the car stopped. When Robert got out of the car, he saw a tall building with an unusual design. Standing next to him, Justin said this was the main office of their bank. Inside, a beautiful girl named Louise greeted them and said she would be assisting Robert with all his inquiries. Noting her beauty and slim figure, our hero handed her the bags and said he'd like to deposit the money, to which she nodded and replied that she would handle everything promptly. She then returned to her station and put the money into the counting machine. Meanwhile, she sat down to fill out the necessary forms. The hero, led to the waiting area, looked around suspiciously, not understanding why he was being treated this way, and started to get really worried. He started suspecting Justin, who was silently sitting next to him, of planning to gain his trust and then get rid of him. After a few minutes of tense silence, Louise entered the room with a cup of coffee for the guest. Surprised by her quick appearance, Robert went to check his banking to see if the money had arrived. Just then, a banking notification popped up, telling him that the total amount in his account was 664,188 yuan and 85 fen. Hearing this, Louise dropped the cup before she could even reach the table. Justin, who jumped up from his seat, was just as shocked as she was. Meanwhile, the banking update indicated that the remaining 1.5 million had been transferred to a savings account, and about 12,000 yuan would be deposited monthly into his bank card. However, the hero was dissatisfied, thinking it was too little. Justin and Louise couldn't believe someone would call such a huge sum too small, especially when the richest person in China had 380 million in their account. Pulling out their business cards, they both bowed deeply to Robert and said if he ever needed anything, they would arrange it immediately. The hero took the business cards and, heading towards the exit, thanked them for the offer, saying it was time for him to leave. Justin and Louise were overjoyed at the honor of helping such a wealthy person. A bit later, Robert hit the gym to check on his friend. He figured it was time to let go of the weirdness happening around and just chill out. When a familiar voice called out to him from behind, he instantly turned around. He saw Angelica, tying her long hair into a ponytail. Looking at her, he smiled and gave a thumbs up. Annoyed, Angelica kicked his leg, asking why he was staring at her like that. Her irritation quickly faded, and she let out a resigned sigh. Noticing her gloomy mood, Robert asked what was wrong. She tried to punch him in the chest again, but he managed to block it with his hands, which took the hits instead. She grumbled about how yesterday they were handing out those beachy flyers again, and how an 800 Mao price tag seemed like daylight robbery. Barely holding back her furious strikes, Robert cracked a smile and said that as long as she's not used to adult life, she'll keep getting disappointed, deciding that as long as he has money, he can do anything. He stepped closer to Angelica, closing the gap between them, and offered his help. His words only amused her. Laughing, she said that was impossible since he was even poorer than her and headed towards the exit. Robert wanted to help her because she had helped him once too. The last time his business failed, he was about to jump off a bridge, but she saved him at the very last moment. After that, she invited him over and gave him a spare room. For that reason, our hero decided he had to repay her for all the kindness she had shown him. A bit later, they left the hall together and went to a clothing store because Angelica needed a dress for an event happening in a few days. As soon as they entered, a pretty girl greeted them and led them to the dress section, saying these outfits would suit Angelica best. Robert looked around and noted that the clothes here didn't look cheap, and since his friend was ready to rent such an expensive dress, the upcoming event must be pretty serious. Our heroes turned around simultaneously when someone suddenly called out to Angelique. From behind, Olivia recognized her old acquaintance and, approaching her with her man, haughtily asked what brought Angela here. Robert noticed his friend's mood change almost immediately from this encounter. Meanwhile, Olivia explained to her companion that this girl was her former classmate and that she had foolishly turned down a wealthy heir once. Without taking his eyes off Angelique, Paul smirked, deciding she would be his next target. Meanwhile, Olivia continued to mock her old acquaintance, asking if she really dared to come to Yana's birthday party and that if she had no money, she shouldn't pretend to be someone she's not by resorting to renting clothes. Her words irritated Angelique. Just as she was about to respond to the jabs thrown at her, Robert stepped forward and said that unlike some, Angela is beautiful enough to look good in absolutely any outfit. In response, Olivia, pointing at the guy, grumpily replied that people like him belong on a farm and that he should just stand quietly on the side and keep his mouth shut. Then she turned back to Angela, asking how much longer she would keep pretending to be someone she's not, as it's high time she accepted her place and stopped making unnecessary waves in front of others. Seeing how her face twisted in displeasure, Olivia smirked proudly, saying she was here to buy clothes, not rent them like some people. To the surprise and confusion of our heroes, right after these words, Paul pushed the girl next to him aside, saying she was too harsh. Without taking his eyes off Angelica, and with a look that promised trouble, He said he had plenty of money and could lend her some to buy any outfit here. Angelica involuntarily stepped back. At that moment, Olivia leaned closer to him and said in a slightly displeased voice that she was against it, since he had already promised to buy clothes for her. Plus, he didn't even know Angelica's taste. Our heroes watched the argument between the couple with bewilderment. With a disappointed sigh, Angelica took Robert's hand and said that was enough, so they were leaving. But the hero stopped her, asking her to wait. Then he turned to a nearby consultant and asked if these two had bought anything yet, to which the girl responded negatively. Robert nodded in satisfaction and said he would buy everything in this store and, pointing to the couple in front of him, asked that they not be sold anything more here. Paul and Olivia's faces showed surprise at his words, but it quickly passed, and Olivia, laughing loudly, asked if Robert was really in any state to play the hero, and if he even knew how much buying everything in this store would cost him. The hero smiled and, pulling out his wallet, replied that she was right. He had no idea at all. Opening the wallet, he took out a 5 yuan bill, saying that such trifles didn't bother him at all. Seeing the contents of the wallet, Paul was horrified, involuntarily thinking that Robert must have robbed a bank, as no ordinary person could ever get their hands on such a huge amount of money. Meanwhile, the hero handed one of the bills to the consultant and asked if it was enough to buy all the clothes. She, looking at the money extended, hesitantly answered that it was way too much. Olivia and Paul tried to figure out if this was some kind of prank and where Angelica had even found this guy. Robert, paying no attention to them, smiled contentedly at his surprised friend and said that now that her clothing issue was settled, they could go grab a bite somewhere. The couple opposite got a nosebleed from the scene. Suddenly, a dark-haired girl walked into the room with 2 guards, introduced herself as Anna, and announced that she owned the store. She was totally surprised to find Mr. Robert already there, just as she had returned from seeing Justin. Hearing that familiar name, our hero tensed up, not expecting the old man to act so quickly. Still addressing Robert, Anna suggested they go upstairs to discuss everything. Thinking he could learn more about his and Justin's dealings from this conversation, he agreed to her proposal. As soon as Anna got his response, she turned to another pair and asked if these two were his friends. A nervous Paul replied that they were very close friends. Olivia decided to play along too, grabbing Angela's hand and declaring that she and Robert's girl were best buddies. She decided to seize this perfect chance to get closer to the store's owner. A bit surprised, Anna asked if they were classmates. Angelica, trying to pull her hand away, wanted to say they weren't, but Olivia cut her off and, squeezing her hand a bit tighter, told her to stop being shy. When Anna believed her words, Olivia smirked triumphantly. Meanwhile, Anna turned to her colleague and asked her to prepare 5 premium discount clothing cards at 30% off and 2 of her business cards. Judging by Angelica's facial expression, she realized that the girls weren't that close, but she decided to first win over Robert and then deal with everything else. Olivia was pleased that everything had gone so well, and now she was one step closer to a happy future. However, in the next moment, everything went completely off her plan. A displeased Robert stepped forward and said that if Anna wants to introduce them to these two, fine, but he refuses to participate and doesn't want them to so blatantly use his name. Right after that, he grabbed Angelica by the hand and headed towards the exit, throwing in that poor folks like them are unworthy of mingling with noble people like Olivia. For more details about what happened, he advised Anna to consult her colleague. She immediately approached her boss and explained the situation, causing Anna's face to twist in displeasure. Catching up with our heroes, she blocked their way, apologizing for all the inconvenience and asking them not to leave so quickly. Then she turned around and ordered her guards to throw these two out. Olivia and Paul, unhappy with what was happening, started to protest when they were grabbed by the scruff of their necks. Ignoring their words, the guards, just following orders, tossed the pair out. Anna didn't stop there and informed Maria that from today, they were cutting ties with these people and also asked her to tell them to leave the premises as soon as possible. Having dealt with that, Anna looked at Robert and, pointing towards the stairs, suggested they talk in a quieter setting. The hero nodded and followed her. So, a few minutes later, everyone was sitting around the table with fragrant tea. Anna complimented Angelica's remarkable figure and looks, saying she had never seen anyone like her, despite being in the fashion business for many years. The girl sitting opposite her lowered her head and modestly replied that Anna was exaggerating. Robert then asked Anna to help pick out a few suitable outfits for his companion. Anna called over Maria and said that they were real pros at this sort of thing. The consultant approached Angelica and asked her to follow without looking their way. Robert noted that Anna catches on quickly and knows how to connect with people. The girls quickly got absorbed in picking out clothes. As they did so, time slowly edged towards evening. The fitting session ended only a couple of hours later, as the first stars began to appear in the sky. Anna thanked Robert for visiting her store and handed him a VIP membership card with 5 yen already on it, and mentioned that it could also be used in other stores. The hero accepted the card and thanked the girl. Right after that, he and Angelica left the store. Noticing that his friend was deep in thought, he stopped in front of her and, waving his hand, asked what was on her mind. Angelica jumped, startled, and asked if all of this was real, to which Robert, with a smile, asked what she thought about it. Upset that she had been deceived all this time, the girl lunged at the hero with her fists again. She asked how he could deceive her all this time and pretend to be poor for 7 whole months. A few minutes later, after unleashing all her anger on him, she sighed and asked with dissatisfaction if he was happy now that he'd tricked her. To which Robert guiltily responded that he really had been broke until recently. He just got lucky with some investments and hit the jackpot. Not believing his excuse for a second, Angelica grabbed him by the shirt and demanded to know how some investments could possibly make Anna bend to their will and how he could treat her like this, scheming behind her back and hiding his wealth, thinking she was a complete fool. This could have gone on much longer if Anna's phone hadn't suddenly rung. She immediately let go of Robert and, answering the call, anxiously asked what happened. The news she heard didn't please her. Her friend was in trouble. After hearing the details, Angelica was baffled and terrified. About 20 minutes later, a taxi pulled up to the building of a well-known restaurant. As soon as the car stopped, the passenger door opened. Angelica burst out and, completely ignoring Robert's shouts behind her, dashed towards the entrance. Our hero had no choice but to follow her. He knew Sophia was Angelica's best friend, so he got why she reacted that way. But he also knew that her rushing off wouldn't end well. Meanwhile, Angelica had already made it to the doors and rushed into the hall. That's when she was suddenly grabbed. 2 girls instantly surrounded her from both sides, grabbing her arms. Angelica recognized them right away and anxiously asked where her friend was. They smiled and said there was something more important than Sophia right now. With that, the girls headed towards the tables. Seeing her classmate, Catherine greeted Angelica, mentioning that it had been a long time since they last saw each other. The girls who brought Angelica here sat her down at a table, ignoring her questions about Sophia and saying they just hadn't seen each other for a while and thought this would be a good reason to call her over. Pointing behind Angelica, Catherine asked who that handsome guy was, wondering if he might be her boyfriend. Angelica blushed at the question and only then remembered she hadn't come here alone. But Robert, unlike her, didn't lose his cool and with a smile, responded that he was indeed her boyfriend. Then he asked if he could join them, to which Catherine gave her approval. As he sat down at the table, our hero couldn't help but notice the abundance of dishes on it. Somehow he had a bad feeling about the girls' words that they just wanted to chat with Angelica. All this time, Catherine kept a keen gaze on him, resting her chin on her hands. She asked how he managed to win Angelica over, guessing that he must be incredibly wealthy. He just smiled slightly and replied that it goes without saying. From the get-go, he knew they were just trying to scam them and wasn't about to fall for it. So he asked if they had eaten enough and suggested to his friend that maybe they should change places. Catherine and her cronies smirked as she said that they had just sat down and it was too soon to leave. She wasn't planning on letting this couple off the hook that easily, at least not until Angelica paid for their table. Contrary to her expectations, Angelica told Robert that she hadn't eaten anything here, so they could leave. That's when Veronica chimed in, looking all sad, asking how they could leave without even trying a bun. Realizing they couldn't just walk away, Robert sighed and, calling over a passing waiter, asked for the menu. Veronica and Xenia exchanged a mocking glance, delighted that he fell for their trap so easily. Completely oblivious to their stares, our heroes discussed the local menu. Seizing the moment, Catherine discreetly called her brother and told him she was at Restaurant O with the girls for a meal. Then she turned to Robert and Angela, asking if they minded her stepping away for a bit, to which he replied sarcastically that he didn't mind, especially since others were getting calls too. With his approval, all 3 girls left the table, chatting animatedly on their phones, while Catherine told the remaining heroes not to get bored without them. Half an hour later, all the girls' invited friends arrived and kicked off a real feast. Robert stood up from the table and asked Angelica to wait for him there while he went to pay the bill. Catherine nodded approvingly, hugged the girl, and said she would look after Angelica in the meantime. Watching as the hero headed towards the cashier, she wondered whether he would leave his girl here or not, because if he did, Angelica would have to wash all the dishes to work off the bill, which would suit Catherine just fine. Meanwhile, the admins were quietly chatting among themselves, discussing the third table that only ordered the most expensive dishes. Their conversation was interrupted by Robert approaching. As the girl totaled up the dishes for all three tables, she reported that the total came to 1 fen, 3 lai, and 200 mao. Pulling out his card from his wallet, Robert asked how much it was for all the tables in the room. The girl replied that in addition to his 3 tables, there were 15 more in the room, and the total for the whole place was 4 fen and 3 lai. She totally didn't get why he also asked about the other tables. The next moment, as he tapped his card on the terminal, Robert announced that he would pay for the other tables too. He also added that he would give a 5 fen tip. Hearing such a large amount for tips, the restaurant admins were totally shocked. But they quickly recovered and, bowing deeply, almost hitting their foreheads on the table surface, thanked him for his generosity. When the loudspeaker announced that Mr. Robert Chain had paid for tonight's dinner and that their restaurant would offer a free dessert to the guests, Angelica and Catherine, along with the other girls, were totally surprised. Catherine didn't expect him to actually cover everything. Annoyed, she pursed her lips, jealously wondering how Angelica managed to snag such a guy. Meanwhile, Robert had already returned to his girlfriend and, helping her up, said that it was time for them to head out and take care of other matters. She was genuinely pleasantly surprised that he decided not to skimp and paid for everyone. Watching the two of them head towards the exit, Catherine continued to seethe with envy. As a familiar waiter passed by her, she called him over and asked him to come closer. In just a moment, a new plan had already formed in her head about how to not let Angelica get away with it. Looking at the waiter again, she said that Robert Chain had spent a ton of her money today and asked for it back. In response, the man smiled and said that they don't do refunds. He also mentioned that Mr. Robert hadn't paid for her tables before and, before leaving, asked her a question. Who allowed her to look down on people? The next moment, 2 fierce-looking guards appeared behind the waiter, and he said that if Catherine refused to pay, they would have to take action. After stating the amount of 1 fen, 3 li, and 200 mao, he asked her how she would like to make the payment, cash or card. Meanwhile, having stepped outside, Angelica sighed resignedly and said that in the future, they would skin her 3 times over, which puzzled Robert, who asked why she thought so since they used to be friends. Angelica ignored the question and, swinging her fists again, asked perplexedly why he liked spending money so much and how much he even had, to which the hero reassuringly replied that he hadn't spent that much, just 5 fen. Suddenly, a system message appeared in front of him, informing him that he had received 5 points, which could be exchanged for additional money, and the exchange function would be available as soon as he accumulated 10 points. Reflecting on this, Robert concluded that since the ratio here was 1 fen per point, he didn't have much left to spend. Suddenly, Angelica hit him on the leg, asking why he was frozen. She then moved forward, saying that today's expenses were on him for dinner. Robert smiled and asked who else in this city could boast the richest chef, to which the girl chuckled and advised him to hurry up with the cooking, saying if he did it well, he might even earn the title of best chef. Suddenly, our hero's phone rang and Ivan's number popped up on the screen. Thinking Ivan might need help, Robert answered the call. But contrary to his expectations, as soon as he picked up, Ivan's cheerful voice boomed across the street, saying he found a way to make some cash and asking where Robert was at the moment. Soon, Ivan's car pulled up nearby. After apologizing and saying goodbye to Angelica, our hero walked over to the car. Getting into the front passenger seat, he asked for more details about the project. Ivan smiled and admitted that the project wasn't actually his, but it was indeed a big deal. Then he asked if Robert had heard about an internet celebrity who had recently become very popular. Receiving a nod from our hero, he explained that a live broadcast of a Qigong Masters performance was coming up, and they were looking for a few guys to throw some fake punches, after which they could make a cool 8 grand. Disappointed by what he heard, Robert skeptically asked if this was really the big project, to which Ivan cheerfully replied that it was definitely better than just sitting at home. The next moment, the guys jerked forward as someone cut them off. When Ivan opened the door and looked outside, he saw that another car had rear-ended them. The girl who came out, clearly annoyed, asked who even taught them to drive. Ivan stepped forward and blamed her for speeding through a red light and crashing into them. Looking back at the car, he noticed a BMW logo and wondered how she could even afford such a car. Christina wasn't about to admit she was at fault, so she attacked Ivan again, saying he should have known better than to park just anywhere in the city. Annoyed, Ivan replied that the light was red, which means everyone should have stopped. But the girl cut him off, yelling that unless he pays her $5 right now, she's not going anywhere. That's when Robert stepped in, telling them to calm down because the police would arrive soon and sort everything out. Now Christina turned her attacks towards him. And just at that moment, a uniformed officer approached and asked what was happening. Fuming with anger, Christina pointed at Ivan and said that these two were driving so weirdly that she accidentally crashed into them, and now they refused to pay for the repairs. While Ivan countered that he was just standing there waiting for the green light. Sighing, the officer gestured for everyone to calm down. After checking out the cars, he looked over at Christina and said that the guys were at a red light when she hit them, and he'd like to see her driver's license. This pissed her off even more, and she yelled that her car's paint costs more than that wreck, so she should be compensated anyway. But the cop cut her off again, asking for her driver's license. When it turned out she didn't have her license, passport, or any ID on her, Robert and Ivan, standing nearby, started snickering at her. Thinking about what to do next, the cop's gaze accidentally fell on Christina's shoes, and he noted with displeasure that she was also driving in heels. He sighed wearily, turned around, and asked everyone to stay put while he called a forensic expert. As soon as the man left, Christina shot the guys an annoyed look and hissed that they would regret this. At her words, the guys just exchanged amused glances and shrugged. Meanwhile, Christina called her boyfriend and complained about what had happened, asking him to come over quickly. At that very moment, Robert's phone rang. When he saw Justin's name, he was really surprised, but decided to answer the call. Sitting in his office, the man happily greeted the guy and mentioned that he heard his girlfriend would be attending an event in 2 days. So Anna prepared a small gift for her, and he himself could help out if anything comes up. Stressed that the news reached Justin so quickly, the hero replied that it was just a small event, so there was no need for that. Then he asked how the man got his number since Anna didn't have his contacts, to which Justin said he knew the city mayor well and found out through him. Hearing this, Robert sighed heavily and, glancing at Christina, asked the man if he could find out something for him. Justin listened to the guy's request and promised to sort everything out as soon as possible. When Christina heard Robert's voice telling someone that it wouldn't be bad to strip her of her rights for life, she immediately frowned. Turning to him, she yelled that he talks too much and that he shouldn't naively believe that his village friends could help here, and as soon as her boyfriend arrives, they would pay for everything. Worried by her words, Ivan suggested to Robert to just quietly leave, but he shook his head and said everything was fine. They just needed to wait a bit. About 20 minutes later, a white car pulled up. As soon as she saw him, Christina instantly perked up and with a joyful smile dashed towards her boyfriend. Muttering under his breath, Paul stepped out of the car. He immediately noticed 2 guys standing nearby and angrily demanded to know how they dared. Barely containing his rage about having to rush over and the situation as a whole, he shouted that he was one of the most influential people in the city, and no outsider had the right to throw their weight around here. Standing with his back to him, Robert instantly recognized his voice and a playful smirk appeared on his lips. Turning to Paul, he said he was glad to see familiar faces around. Paul, recognizing Robert, was shockingly frozen in place. All his previous anger and irritation instantly vanished, replaced by confusion and awkwardness, especially with the fresh memories of this morning's events. Robert remembered everything too. So with a smirk, he noted how amazing it was that fate had them bump into each other twice in one day. Chuckling awkwardly, Paul replied that it was indeed a funny coincidence. Confused by her boyfriend's behavior, Christina clung to him and demanded that Paul deal with these 2 idiots ASAP. Her words instantly pissed the guy off, and he demanded an explanation about what the heck was going on. The girl stepped back and, pointing towards the guys, explained that they had stopped right in front of her, causing her to bump into them. As soon as she said that, Paul slapped her hard and asked incredulously if she realized how much the repairs would cost him now because of her stupidity. Watching the unpleasant scene of the girl being hit, the guys standing nearby were shocked by what Paul was capable of, but they hesitated to intervene. After venting his anger on a crying Christina, he turned his gaze to Robert, wondering how to handle the situation. Thinking it over, he pulled out a gold coin. Then he approached our hero, flashed a big smile, and apologized for the inconvenience. As he said this, he offered the coin as compensation. Robert looked at the man in front of him in surprise, saying nothing. A few moments later, he just turned around and headed to his car, irritably mentioning he still had unfinished business. Paul was deeply shocked that his kind gesture was ignored like that. Hoping to mend things, he called out to Robert and politely asked if he could talk again with Anna, the shop owner, since they had a good collaboration for a long time before. Meanwhile, Justin was still at the office. After calling his guy, he checked if all the necessary information had been reviewed. The moment he heard someone had dared to harm Robert, he literally fell out of his chair in shock. As Paul was asking for advice, right at that moment, the man's phone rang. After seeing Robert out, he answered the call and irritably said he was too busy to talk right now. In response, an enraged Justin yelled at him because his BMW had crashed into a very important person's car. Christina, who heard the whole conversation, clenched her fists and with a threatening tone said that Paul was done for. Our heroes watched the couple's argument through a mirror. A puzzled Ivan asked Robert what had just happened and why that man was so scared of him, and what the shop owner had to do with it. Without taking his eyes off his phone screen, the hero replied that it was someone he had worked with before, and the fat guy just wanted to make a deal, then added that he'd pay him back now. As soon as Ivan heard Robert's question about whether 5 Mao would be enough, he nearly lost control of the car from shock. Startled by the sudden swerve, the hero asked his friend if he was sure he could drive, to which he replied with confusion that he had only given him 1 or 2 Mao before, but Robert gave him 5. But when asked about the money, Ivan didn't respond, pondering where his friend could have gotten such funds. Sighing, Robert asked Ivan to accept the money, as it would come in handy sooner or later. Afterwards, he caught his own displeased look in the mirror, noticing he was starting to throw money around like the rich do. So they continued driving in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, until suddenly a system window appeared in front of our hero. It stated that he currently had 55 points, and that each point could be spent on improving attributes such as strength, speed, reaction, fighting skills, hearing, and sight. Along with that, another stat enhancement window popped up. Robert was pleasantly surprised that he managed to unlock the enhancement feature in just half a day. Without much thought, he decided to invest all his points. Then he hit the confirm button with a big smile. Contrary to his expectations, the new window just reported that everything was successful. At that moment, Robert felt a wave of disappointment and felt like he'd been cheated. Noticing his friend's mood change, Ivan asked worriedly what happened. They spent the rest of the journey discussing their plans for the near future. The next morning, Robert went to the gym. At the entrance, he was greeted by Yana, the gym manager. As soon as she recognized the visitor as Robert, her mood took a nosedive. Habitually dialing Angelica's number, she mentioned she'd call her over, but the guy said he wasn't here for that today and asked about the membership fee. Yana gave him a calculating look, slightly narrowing her eyes, and asked how much money he had. Robert replied that she shouldn't worry about that. Still skeptical, the girl said she'd call the coach over, but warned him he'd better have enough money or he'd regret it. A few minutes later, a cheerful Alex, one of the trainers, burst into the hall and excitedly asked if someone was actually looking to get a membership. When Yana gestured towards the guy next to her, Alex stopped, puzzled. He started looking around and asked where the gentleman she mentioned was. His words exhausted Yana's patience, and slamming her hand on the countertop, she asked incredulously how he could not see him. In response to her words, Alex smirked and said he only saw the poor guy who's always hanging around Angelica. Definitely not a guest. Sighing, Yana irritably asked Alex whether he would take him or not. Alex frowned unhappily, knowing full well she likes everything to be by the book, so he couldn't afford to mess up. Deciding to play along, he shrugged and said he'd take Robert since he had no other choice anyway, and added that the hero's dependency on girls was starting to get annoying. Yana was about to object, but suddenly Robert stepped forward, gesturing for her not to interfere. Then, without taking his eyes off the coach, he said that if he didn't want to, he didn't have to take him. There was absolutely no problem, he'd just go to another club. Alex turned around, laughing loudly, and waving goodbye, he said he didn't need such poor guys. As soon as he went back into the gym, Yana sighed wearily and asked if Robert was going to buy a membership. The hero nodded in agreement and asked her to tell him more about them. Since they were old acquaintances, she decided to tell him everything and explained that they have 2 types of memberships, regular and platinum, which have no time limit and unlimited use of equipment. When Robert said he would take 4 platinum memberships, Yana was truly shocked and puzzled, as one such membership cost 1 Mao. Noticing her stupor, he pinched her cheek, snapping her back to reality. She immediately lashed out at him, yelling that he shouldn't mock her because no one had managed to get that membership this year, and here he was wanting 4 all at once. But then, in the next moment, a notification of a successful payment of 4 Mao popped up, freezing Yana in shock again. A couple of minutes later, she handed him 4 platinum cards. Now her eyes showed nothing but surprise and curiosity, having heard rumors that he had sold his own house, but she didn't believe they were true. After collecting all the cards, Robert, with a joyful smile, thanked Yana for her help and headed towards the locker rooms. 10 minutes later, he was changed, and now, as he put his clothes into a locker, he thought that Angelica was probably coaching someone right now, so he shouldn't disturb her. Suddenly, a system window appeared in front of him, stating that he had earned 40 points for spending 4 Mao, and that the hero could use these points to enhance his stats. A couple of minutes later, Robert walked into the gym. First thing that caught his eye was an information board hanging at the other end of the room. Thanks to his boosted stats, he could now even read what was written there. Reading that his friend ranked second to last on the gym's trainer leaderboard, he sadly realized that this kind of job definitely wasn't for her. Suddenly, his thoughts were interrupted by a woman's voice, making him turn around immediately. He saw a beautiful brunette who introduced herself as Lucia So, the owner of the gym. She also mentioned that she heard Robert had bought 4 platinum cards, so she decided to meet him personally. Shaking her extended hand, our hero said he would like to take some private lessons. He had heard her name before and knew she had built her business from scratch, which earned his respect. After the introductions, the club owner asked Robert to follow her. A couple of minutes later, they were in Lucia's office, which she shared with her accountant, Sophia. Sitting at a table with cups of coffee, Lucia asked what kind of classes he was interested in. Robert mentioned he was friends with a local trainer, Angelica, and wanted to buy her sessions for 5 yuan. Hearing the price, she asked with surprise if he wanted to consider other trainers. Knowing that the usual cost for sessions was 3 Mao, Lucia was concerned that if Robert paid 5 yuan, Angelica might end up working for him for life, so she asked if he had any ulterior motives against the girl. The hero waved his hands in front of him and reassured the club owner that he and Angelica were close friends and on good terms. He also shared that his friend was worried about her financial situation, so he decided to help her out. Hearing that, Lucia sighed with relief and apologized for jumping to conclusions. She was totally shocked by Robert's motives, willing to spend 5 yuan just to make his girlfriend happy. And yep, a bit of jealousy crept in since her own monthly earnings were just 5 to 6 Mao. The hero asked Lucia to keep it under wraps for now and spill the beans tomorrow during the performance results announcement. The hall owner agreed to his request and asked if Robert would be okay with being added to the chat. Meanwhile, 2 out-of-breath trainers emerged from the locker room, arm in arm. Suddenly, Chris's phone buzzed with several messages about someone just picking a female trainer for 5 yuan. Without taking his eyes off the screen, the man asked Lily standing next to him if she had a new student. But she shook her head no. Wondering who the newbie could be, she guessed it might be Angelica. Chris, on the other hand, figured that if the client chose Angelica, she must have been ready to do whatever it took to snag him. Coming to that conclusion, he decided that maybe later he'd get his chance to finally reach her. Suddenly, Lily pressed closer to his hand, and with a plaintive look, she said she needed this client. Flashing a wide smile, the man confidently stated that she shouldn't worry about it because very soon this client would be theirs. And then he headed towards the hall. Angelica was arranging the dumbbells in their places when someone suddenly called out to her. Standing next to her, Chris, with his phone in hand, teasingly asked if she had seen the message about the client who just paid 5 yuan for sessions with the female trainer. Approaching her leisurely, he mentioned that he and Lily had already agreed that this client would go to her. But if Angelica wanted, they could have a drink tonight. And maybe then, they could share this wealthy client. Contrary to his expectations, the girl brushed his hand off her shoulder and sharply replied that if the client chose Lily, then so be it. Displeased with her refusal, Chris angrily yelled after her that she was losing out big time and would soon regret it. Seeing that his words had no impact on her, he clicked his tongue in annoyance and, murmuring that he had no other choice, decided to take drastic measures. Suddenly, someone knocked on the office door, and Sophia immediately gave permission to enter. The guests didn't keep themselves waiting, and in the next moment, Lily and Chris burst in, with Chris saying he heard the client was giving 5 yuan for the job, and that Lily was ready to start. Sitting at the computer, Sophia adjusted her glasses and firmly replied that those 5 yuan were already allocated. But Chris wasn't about to give up and, with a confident smile, asked who else could take on the job besides them and Lily, the top trainers. Lucia, who had been sitting on the small sofa all this time, irritably set her cup down on the saucer, drawing attention to herself. She then shot a displeased look at the two trainers and asked what they thought they were doing. Chris frowned slightly, trying to figure out what Lucia was even doing here. Lily decided that by addressing the boss directly, she'd have a better chance, and said she wanted to talk about a client who paid 5 yuan. On the contrary, Chris was horrified, realizing that if the boss found out this information had leaked, they would have to face the consequences and possibly lose their jobs, which he really didn't want. Listening to Lily, Lucia frowned even more and asked what the client's name was. Feeling the threat in her voice, the girl stepped back and, waving her hands in front of her, replied that she had forgotten his name, which relieved the nearby Chris. But she didn't stop there and, looking away uncertainly, said she had heard he was a chubby middle-aged man. That just pissed Lucia off even more. She slammed her hand on the table and yelled that they've never had such clients before, then told those two to get lost because she didn't need workers like them. Surprised, Lily asked if this was a joke, while Chris, realizing the danger of the situation, rushed to her and in an apologetic tone said that Lily was a bit mistaken, so there was no need to get so angry. He didn't want them to get rid of this girl because she was a really good employee. At that moment, Lucia jumped up from her seat and shouted that she came today to review the performance reports. Then she announced that this client had chosen Angelica as a coach and ordered the pair to get out of the office immediately before they made her even angrier. Hearing that name, Lily clenched her teeth in displeasure. She couldn't let someone like her snag this client. So, the next moment, she slammed the doors and hurriedly left the office. Meanwhile, Angelica was teaching Robert how to properly perform an exercise on the machine. Lily, furious, stormed into the gym and immediately locked onto her target, charging at her with an angry scream. Angelica reacted quickly, spun around, and caught the hand that was raised to strike. Then she asked Lily in surprise what was going on. Lily yanked her hand away and asked incredulously how Angelica dared to touch her. But before she could do anything else, Robert suddenly grabbed her wrist. Here, Lily couldn't hold back anymore and angrily shouted that if he dared to hit her, he'd be thrown out immediately. But she couldn't finish her sentence, because the next moment he flipped her over his shoulder, making her painfully hit the floor. Afterward, completely ignoring the crowd that had gathered, he said that she was the one who started it all. At that moment, Lucia entered the room and, drawing attention to herself, shouted that she wanted to clarify something. Pointing to Klaus standing behind her, she announced that from now on, he and Lily no longer worked there because they had been up to no good behind her back. She also congratulated Angelica on now being a private trainer for 5 yuan and expressed hope that she could fully embrace this role. The girl standing next to our hero was quite surprised by what she heard, unlike Robert, who had a satisfied smile on his face. Meanwhile, Lucia turned to Chris and ordered him to get Lily out of there. Without a word, he scooped up his unconscious friend by the arm and headed for the exit, hoping they'd have better luck at another club. As soon as they left, Angelica grabbed Robert by the ear and asked him in disbelief what he was even thinking, since she could buy a whole estate with that money. The hero was about to explain himself, but suddenly his phone rang. Pulling out his mobile, he saw Anna Lynn's name light up on the screen. Meanwhile, Angelica kept going on about how she's never seen anyone spend such a huge amount on a gym. Lips pursed, the girl decided to see if she could get the money back, because she couldn't let her friend make another mistake. Robert shifted his gaze back to the screen, totally clueless why Anna decided to call him. As soon as he answered the call, Anna informed our hero that Justin and a rep from the tech company wanted to treat him to dinner. Then she shared the location of the meeting and asked if it would be convenient for him. Since the meeting place wasn't too far, Robert accepted the invitation. An hour later, he arrived at the hotel where the dinner was supposed to take place. Our hero walked confidently towards the men in business suits standing by the window. He immediately recognized one of them as Justin. The guy next to him, Damien Min, was a big shot in real estate. Another man, no less imposing and intimidating, was Charles Hill, who owned the automotive industry. And the last one, Charlie Shu from the entertainment industry. Robert knew these guys were known as the 4 heroes of the province, leaders in their respective industries, and he guessed they weren't here just by chance. Suddenly, a man who approached from behind called out to him, and Robert recognized him as his former classmate. Leon recognized him too, and with a big smile, said he was glad to see him since they hadn't seen each other since university. Robert smiled back and said it was indeed an unexpected coincidence. When another man approached Leon, accompanied by two girls, he mentioned he was here for a meeting with Milena's family. The girl who stepped forward, also Robert's former classmate, greeted him uncertainly, saying she was glad to see him after all this time. Leon, getting even more excited, hugged his old friend by the shoulders and introduced him to his uncle and aunt as their former classmate, with whom they studied business together. Hearing this, the man and woman smiled contentedly, and Olivia couldn't help but praise the guys, saying they were quite ambitious for their age. Unlike Leon, who happily accepted the praise and boasted about his friend's popularity, Robert looked increasingly sullen. Steering the conversation in the direction he wanted, Leon intentionally shared loudly his concerns about how our hero had to sell his own house to pay off all his debts. Now that he understood Leon's goal, Robert smirked contentedly. Ignoring him, the hero turned to Milena and asked why she was here. She replied that she wanted to negotiate and get out of the business, then repeated his question, internally admiring how handsome he had become over time. Milena hadn't gotten her answer when suddenly someone grabbed her hand. Olivia pulled her daughter along, saying they still had a lot to do and shouldn't keep the other guests waiting. And Leon kept mocking Robert. Assuming our hero came here to get a job as a dishwasher, he offered to help him find one. Robert sighed and turned down his offer, saying he came here to eat. Hearing this, Milena was delighted and, with a smile, said that in that case he could go up to the second floor with them, which puzzled her mother. However, when our hero mentioned he needed to go to the third floor, a look of surprise crossed Leon's face. But it didn't last long, because almost instantly, his loud laughter filled the room. And through it, he asked Robert if he got the address wrong, since they pay about 5 feenies just for the second floor, let alone the third. Leaving the two guys behind, Milena headed towards the staircase with her parents. The Chads hurried to meet their guests, since tonight's dinner would seriously affect their future. Meanwhile, trying to get over his laughter, Leon decided to give Robert some advice. He looked up at his old friend with a mocking gaze and told him he should beat it. The hero slightly smirked and said he had a little piece of advice for him too. With that same mocking look, he glanced at Leon and told him he should be the one to leave this place. His words drove the guy into a rage. Fists clenched, he demanded with outrage in his voice how Robert dared to speak to him like that. When Milena advised him to watch his words, Leon turned around and angrily asked who exactly helped her family arrange a meeting with such an important person. Leaving them to sort it out, Robert walked to the staircase, throwing over his shoulder that he couldn't care less about Leon's words. As soon as he heard that, he got even more furious, hurling various insults at our hero's back without stopping for a second. At that moment, a man accompanied by 2 security guards, who turned out to be the hotel manager, approached and asked what was going on here. An infuriated Leon pointed at Robert climbing the stairs and indignantly demanded from the man why he wasn't keeping an eye on his guests and insisted that the hero be thrown out because he had ruined his entire appetite. Philip shifted his gaze to Robert and replied that he couldn't just kick out guests without a reason, and added that Leon was shouting too loudly, which was greatly disturbing his other guests. Unappeased, Leon yelled even louder, urging the man to take a closer look at Robert and see that he was a nobody, clearly not fitting the profile of his usual clients. Then, practically steaming with anger, he turned to our hero, demanding he clear out in 5 seconds. To which Robert replied that 5 seconds was too generous. 3 would suffice to toss Leon out, which only fired up the old friend even more. Suddenly, due to the noise downstairs, Justin came out to the staircase with Anna and Charlie in tow. Their appearance shocked Leon, causing the Chad family to get anxious as he nearly fell to the floor. Meanwhile, Charlie went down to meet Robert and, extending his hand, introduced himself as the owner of the hotel, apologizing for the less than warm welcome. He then turned to his staff and sternly said he gave them 3 seconds to get rid of the noise source, while our hero, glancing back, said there was no need, as the guy was just joking around. At the same time, Olivia moved closer to her daughter and anxiously asked why she hadn't warned them about the status of this young man. While Michael, standing next to her, snapped at his wife, worried about stirring up more trouble. Realizing his defeat, Leon sadly lowered his head and told the couple that it was also time for them to head to the guest. He couldn't understand how a poor guy like Robert could be on good terms with such an influential person. Meanwhile, our hero was escorted to a pre-arranged VIP room in the hotel. Damien greeted him there. He apologized to Robert for only introducing himself now. Once all the greetings were out of the way, Charlie invited him to take a seat at the table. The hero settled into the chair pulled out for him, and with a hint of admiration, mentioned that he had heard about the reputation of their group before, but never imagined he'd have the honor to meet them. Charlie laughed deeply and said they weren't all that great. Justin smiled contentedly, liking that Robert already knew about the group, because it increased the chances that he'd take a liking to them. Meanwhile, Charlie said that their reputation was nothing compared to our hero. Damien chose to observe from the sidelines, thinking that without Justin, they wouldn't have known about this rather complex guy. Anna, joining the conversation, suggested they eat first and then move on to more important topics, especially since she had been wanting to have a drink with Robert for a while. But our hero objected to that suggestion, stopping the girl with a gesture. Facing her puzzled look, he explained that alcohol would only hinder their negotiations. He was eager to find out why such influential people had requested a meeting with him. Justin was ready to get down to business and started speaking first. But he was interrupted by Robert, who, after taking a sip of water, stated that they had a lot to discuss today regarding some major figures. Then he sharply put down his glass, saying he likes to speak directly, so he advised the men present that if they had something to say, they should get straight to the point. Anna nodded in agreement, and looking at Damien, mentioned that Robert was very perceptive, so they could skip the formalities and speak openly. The man sighed and said he would start then. He then explained that in the past, a major land company had started liquidating several real estate businesses, and since his own company T was a leader in the province, they had to defend themselves. But due to sharp stock fluctuations, their revenues had plummeted, and soon the company might face losses. Therefore, if he couldn't find investors, not only would he face problems, but others would too. Summing up the man's words, Robert asked if this meant they were seeking his help. Damien knew about our hero's dire situation, so he was his last chance for salvation. He told Robert that they had a way to change things, but they needed 10,000 yen to do it. Casually examining the contents of his bowl, our hero mentioned he had that kind of money, but in return, he had a counteroffer. Hearing this, a stunned Damien jumped up from his seat. Robert shot him a dark look. Then he said that since things were so chaotic, he could take control of the situation. These words also greatly surprised Charlie. Justin, frowning in confusion, asked Robert if he meant to say that he was planning to take control of Company T. Our hero smiled contently, saying it was a fair trade, his money for their power. His offer to run everything from behind the scenes left everyone in shock and bewilderment. Damien, lips pursed in displeasure, figured they'd need about $17,000 to take control of the situation. Although he knew Robert's offer would save them from disaster, trusting a stranger with the company's affairs felt way too risky. Sensing their hesitation, the hero sighed and, pulling out his phone, asked for the company's account details. As soon as his request was fulfilled, he transferred 100,000 yuan. Everyone gathered watched in bafflement as a transfer of such an incredible amount hit Damien's account. Watching them, Robert cracked a slight smile, thinking to himself that for him, it was just 100 grand he'd easily make back with the points he'd gain. His thoughts were abruptly interrupted by a system notification that dropped on him out of nowhere. The message voiced suspicions that our hero was intentionally accumulating points, so only 1,000 points were awarded. Robert was quite displeased that his plan was uncovered so quickly. He was puzzled why he hadn't been informed about all the nuances earlier. Otherwise, he wouldn't have spent so much money. Suddenly, he was jolted out of his not-so-cheerful reflections. Looking at the men standing before him, he knew it was time to answer. All three bowed at once, declaring that from this moment on, they were his subordinates. To that, Robert replied that they were being too kind, since they were now all in the same boat. Soon, they were served food. Holding a glass of red wine, the hero contemplated that if they all worked together, they could even reach Dao Lake. Everyone present knew that the country's entire savings were hidden in that lake, so they shuddered in surprise and looked uncertainly at the guy in front of them. But before taking any action, Robert said they needed to think everything through carefully, while he also thought about the points he had accrued. Just as he thought about adding some attributes, a message popped up that 1,500 points had been added to his strength, making Robert drop his glass in surprise. Hitting the floor, the fragile glass shattered into many pieces. An anxious Anna jumped up from her seat and asked Robert if everything was okay, to which he replied that he had gotten his hands dirty, so he would step away to the restroom for a bit. As soon as he started to get up, leaning on the edge of the countertop, the wood under his palm instantly cracked deeply. The next moment, the table snapped into pieces. The men jumped back and stared in bewilderment at the broken table, made of the finest wood. They slowly raised their wary eyes to Robert, thinking he was giving them a warning this way. After stepping into the restroom, our hero splashed his face with cold water and, looking at himself in the mirror with a satisfied smile, thought that the money was well spent. Not only his strength improved, but also his speed and perception. With his eyes closed, relying only on his hearing, he managed to catch a fly buzzing by. Thanks to his enhanced abilities, Robert could hear better than ever. He could even eavesdrop on a conversation between the Chad family. Meanwhile, Michael was trying to figure out why Pavel, whom they had already made a deal with, told others about their issues. The man, hearing such an accusation, just smirked and said that Michael better have solid evidence, or he could sue him for defamation. Plus, they had already talked about this before. Milena hesitated, looked down, and said she wouldn't be drinking with him. Leon, sitting next to an increasingly irritated Pavel, poured some more wine for the man and told him to cool down, offering to sell him boilers for half price. Pavel was totally uninterested in the offer, so the next moment he pushed him and the chair aside. He then stood up, clearly annoyed, and asked why they even came here empty-handed and couldn't even string two words together. Frowning, he turned his gaze to the Chad family and declared that it was over for them. Suddenly, he had a brilliant idea and suggested they sell Milena to him, which might save the situation. But this proposal only horrified the girl and her mother. Just as the man was about to approach them, someone grabbed his arm, stopping him. Looking at Pavel, Robert said that maybe he could cheer him up instead of Milena. The man jerked his arm away, baffled, asking the stranger who he was and how he even got there. Recognizing him, Leon got up from the floor and glared at the hero, yelling for him to get out of there. But Robert didn't respond, just shot him a cold, disdainful look. He then turned his attention to Milena and said he heard everything, so she shouldn't go with Pavel. To avoid any questions, he added that from now on, the Chad family would be supplying their chickens to this hotel at double the price. Milena was sure that Robert wasn't lying and that she could trust him, so she was really happy that her family's problem was finally solved. At that moment, Pavel intervened, telling the hero that his words were too loud and arrogant, since he first needed to get permission from the hotel itself. Leon and Pavel shot hateful glances at the guy, wishing he would just leave as soon as possible. But when no reaction came from Robert, Pavel resorted to threats, promising to get rid of him if he didn't get out of his way, just as other guests entered the room. Hearing someone's displeased voice asking Pavel who he was planning to get rid of, the man immediately turned around, irritably asking who else was there. However, as soon as he recognized the newcomers who were glaring at him angrily, he immediately backed down. Trying to figure out what they were doing here, Pavel didn't react to Charlie approaching. Without a hint of pity, he delivered a strong blow to the man's face. Robert and Milena weren't too surprised by what was happening, unlike Milena's parents, who watched the scene in horror and confusion. Leon, standing aside, was hit by a massive shiver of fear, completely clueless about what was going on and why all these people had come here. When Robert got tired of watching Pavel getting beaten, he sighed and said that was enough. Charlie listened to him and let the man go, then pulled out a handkerchief and wiped his hands. Bowing respectfully to our hero, he asked what was going on here. The hotel owner's polite address to Robert deeply shocked Leon. Pavel was just as stunned as he was. This contrast in Charlie's behavior really stressed the man out, since just a moment ago he was ready to kill him, and now he's bowing to some guy. Realizing that Robert might be the son of someone very influential, he knew he shouldn't have spoken to him like that. As soon as our hero shared what was going on, Charlie said that things would go Robert's way since the hotel has a lot of branches and it's easy enough to lose a few thousand chickens a day. Then he turned to Milena and with a smile handed her his business card. Once that issue was settled, Charlie asked Robert what to do about Pavel and Leon standing behind him. The first guy dropped to the floor in terror as the hero started slowly moving towards him. Crouching next to him, Robert gave a fake smile and warned him that if he ever messed with Chad's family again, he'd be dead on the spot. Then he ordered Charlie to get rid of those two and leave the hall with Anna, Justin, and Damien. Milena watched the guy go, hoping that someday she could repay him for his help today. Sometime later, our hero stepped outside the hotel where Ivan was waiting to tell him that the job he mentioned last time starts tonight. Heading to the driver's door, Robert said they needed to grab a bite first. When he suddenly yanked the car door towards himself, practically ripping it off the frame, Ivan flinched in surprise and astonishment. The hero was horrified at the thought that he couldn't properly control his superhuman strength. Sobbing with grief, Ivan grabbed his friend by the shirt and asked what he was doing, since it was a rental car and the repairs would cost him a pretty penny. At Robert's suggestion to just buy a new car, Ivan cried even harder and asked where he would get the money for a new one. Then the hero handed him a yuan and asked if that would be enough. His friend momentarily froze in shock at the sight of the money. With a happy smile spreading across his face, Ivan replied that it would be enough. A bit later, Robert contacted Justin and asked for help choosing the right car, admitting he didn't know much about cars and suggested consulting Charles. So, while waiting for Charles to arrive, our heroes decided to stroll around the showroom, where a young woman immediately approached them and said she could help with the choice. Uncertainly following his friend, Ivan asked him if he was really going to buy a car. Robert laughed and, clapping Ivan on the shoulder, asked what was so strange about it, especially since it was his fault for the loss. Ivan couldn't help but notice that the hero was too kind to him, not only giving him a car, but also money. So in the name of old friendship, he promised himself not to let him down. With those thoughts, he excitedly exclaimed that in that case, he wouldn't be modest and would pick a cool ride. After checking out a few cars, Angelina led the guy to the lounge area. The girl brought them coffee and asked them to wait a bit here while she prepared the contract. A joyful Ivan admitted that he could never have imagined that he would one day buy a car straight from the showroom. Robert playfully nudged him, saying that back when he was still poor, it was Ivan who helped him. Suddenly, loud, unhappy shouts caught the friend's attention. Angelina angrily advised the three visitors standing in front of her that they should wait their turn. To another consultant's objection, she replied that her client came first. Edgar sighed irritably and said that they should know how valuable his time is and wrap up this circus. Claire turned to her client and, apologizing for it, asked him to wait a bit while she sorted everything out. Then she walked up to Angelina and angrily said that she better keep an eye on the list, since a Dior R8 car isn't cheap and not everyone can afford them. A girl standing aside also decided to intervene. Swinging, she slapped Angelina sharply when she tried to argue again. She then indignantly asked how she even dared to open her mouth in their presence. Warming up her hand for another hit, Mirabelle, with a smug smile on her face, warned the consultant that if she dared to interfere again, she'd teach her a harsher lesson on who she can and cannot talk back to. At that moment, Robert approached the crying Angelina and handed her a tissue. Turning his gaze to Mirabelle, he asked her if she really thinks that a Dior car would be out of his league. His question brought a mocking smile to Edgar's face, who said that the only thing affordable for Robert would probably be a shopping cart. Holding her boyfriend's hand, Mirabelle, looking at the hero, asked if he even knew who he was dealing with. Edgar Lopez, the second son of the owner of pharmaceutical company C. Robert smirked and replied that he had heard of that company, known for selling various fakes. Those words cracked the company air up. Stepping forward, he asked Robert if he was out of his mind or just too bold. His tone instantly switched to annoyed, and he shouted that no one dares to speak to him like that. Ivan, standing behind, rolled up his sleeves and asked Edgar just as irritably what he was doing. Even though he was poor, he couldn't let anyone treat his friend that way. Right in the heat of the brewing fight, a man in a business suit and glasses burst into the room. As soon as Claire told him everything, Richard sided with Edgar and explained that he was a client with certain privileges. So if Robert wanted to buy a car, he'd have to wait or go to another dealership. After hearing this, the hero clicked his tongue in displeasure. He didn't want to resort to drastic measures, but the situation forced his hand. Those words irritated Mirabelle, and stepping forward, she raised her hand to slap him, asking what a poor man like him could possibly do. Robert had no trouble catching her wrist. The girl tried to pull her hand free, but when she couldn't, she yelled for him to let go immediately and raised her other hand to strike. Robert wasn't about to take her attacks, so he kicked her in the stomach first. Because he didn't measure his strength, Mirabelle was sent flying across the room. Those present watched in horror and amazement as the girl lay on the floor. Quickly turning to Robert, Edgar angrily shouted that he had 5 seconds to kneel and apologize, or he'd regret ever being born. In response, the hero flipped him off and said if he wanted an apology that badly, he should make him do it. Robert couldn't have imagined that investing 1,500 points in strength would send someone flying that far. Edgar accepted his challenge and, pulling out his phone from his jacket pocket, menacingly stated that he was about to show him why he shouldn't have interfered. Claire helped Mirabelle up from the floor, and as the girls approached, the latter asked Edgar to urgently call Uncle Julian. At that moment, Ivan came over and whispered that things were heating up and it might be time for them to leave. Robert shook his head and said that leaving would be too easy, and they couldn't just abandon Angelina like that. Then he stepped forward, pulling out his phone, and told them not to worry. He'd handle everything. Knowing Julian Fay was under Charlie, he decided to dig deeper. Meanwhile, Claire kept defending Mirabelle, warning that soon things would get too serious for jokes. Pointing at her colleagues standing near their clients, she shouted that as soon as Edgar sorts everything out, she'd be out of a job. Robert shifted his gaze from the screen to his friend, reminding him of his earlier words that they wouldn't leave Angelina in peace even after they were gone. In that time, Edgar had managed to contact his uncle and fill him in, asking him to come over. After ending the call, he smirked at the guys sitting on the couch and said it didn't matter who they planned to call. They wouldn't be able to hide from his uncle. Putting his phone back in his inside pocket, Robert smiled and said they didn't need to. He would just wait for his uncle to arrive. About half an hour later, several tinted cars pulled up to the entrance of the salon. Julian stepped out, flanked by a dozen armed subordinates. As soon as Edgar saw his uncle, he perked up and pointed at Robert and Ivan, saying these two were the ones who bullied him and asked for them to be dealt with immediately. Hearing his request, Julian frowned and gave his nephew a threatening look. The next moment, he grabbed his nephew by the jacket, pulled him close, and kneed him hard in the stomach. Mirabelle immediately knelt beside her beloved and glared at the man, asking what he was doing. Julian ignored her and, snapping his fingers, ordered his men to teach them a little lesson. Screams of pain from Mirabelle and Edgar filled the room next, begging for mercy, while Robert watched with a pleased smile, unlike Ivan, who stood by, shocked, kneeling before Julian. Edgar, with tears in his eyes, asked in a bewildered tone why those two were blamed, yet he was the one suffering. In response, the man kicked his nephew again, sending him flying to the side, and said that he didn't need to understand anything because it wasn't that important. When Edgar collapsed unconscious on the floor, Mirabelle flinched. Looking at Julian with confusion and displeasure, she asked if he had some kind of problem in his head, since instead of helping, which is why they called him here, he was hurting them. Those words really pissed the guy off. He shot her a deadly glare and told her she should just keep quiet and stay out of the way. When he told his guys that he was leaving Mirabelle to them, they got pretty pumped. He then went back to Edgar, grabbed him by the head, slightly lifting him, and advised him to listen very carefully. He then explained to his nephew that he had provoked a very important person, which is why he was getting what he deserved, and his fate would directly depend on his behavior. A few minutes later, Edgar and Mirabelle were lying on the floor, badly beaten and too weak to even move. As soon as they were dealt with, Julian headed towards Robert. Shocked, Ivan quietly said that this guy was clearly no ordinary man. After what he saw, he feared Julian might come after them too, which slightly amused Robert, who smiled and assured his friend that no one was going to beat them. The next moment, Julian and his men bowed and apologized for the inconvenience caused. Right after that, he pointed towards the worried Claire and the salon director and asked what should be done with these two. Robert replied that the girl was getting too bold and asked to take care of her properly. She didn't have to wait long for her request to be carried out. Almost instantly, two bruisers approached her and started dragging the resisting Claire towards the exit. Ivan kept being amazed by what was happening around here, and as he approached Robert, he quietly asked why this man was listening to him, to which the hero replied that this was just the tip of the iceberg. Ivan barely had time to ask another question when his eyes widened in surprise again. Heading their way with quick steps was Charles Hill, a big shot in the automotive industry. As the man, excited by the long-awaited meeting, rushed past the dealership manager, the latter panicked. Stopping in front of Robert, Charles greeted him with a joyful smile, apologizing for his lateness, to which the hero smiled back and said he arrived just in time. His friendly smile quickly turned into a grim expression when he shifted his gaze to Angelina standing nearby and asked what had happened here. Under the man's intense gaze, the girl recounted everything. As soon as she finished, Charles nodded approvingly and, looking back at Robert, asked what he thought about her story. After a moment's thought, he replied that overall, it was as she said. But she had softened some parts, then pointed to the director collapsed on the floor in horror and quoted his words about needing to either wait or leave to buy a car. When the guy kneeled down and started apologizing for his mistake, Charles cut him off, telling him to get lost immediately. After that, two of Julian's guys threw out everyone who messed up. Once outside, Julian said with disapproval that they shouldn't have messed with his boss and warned that if he sees them here again, it would be the end for them. When one of his guys asked who this Robert guy was, Julian kicked him in the leg and angrily shouted not to disrespect the boss like that. Meanwhile, a worried Angelina asked what would happen to her. Charles replied that she could keep working and asked her to leave them because he needed to talk with their guests. As soon as the girl complied, The man offered the hero help in choosing a car. Robert gratefully accepted his offer. Sometime after seeing all the models presented to him, our hero narrowed his choice down to 2 cars. He thought they were good enough options and decided to go for them. Once all the formalities were squared away, Charles, eager to see what this guy was like in a different setting, asked about his plans for the evening and invited him to dinner. Robert apologized, saying he had some business to take care of and suggested they meet up another time. Then he got into his car and mentioned that he'd come back for the second one after he'd dropped this car off. Right after that, he drove off, leaving the dealership behind. The man frowned, thinking that Robert wasn't too happy, which might affect their future collaboration, so he decided to discuss this with the others. Meanwhile, Ivan was trying to find out how his friend had managed to rise so quickly and why such influential people were listening to him. Robert smirked and jokingly replied that maybe he had just become a feng shui master. He then added that ultimately, he had changed the fate of 4 rulers, and that was reason enough for them to start respecting him. Ivan was genuinely impressed by his friend's skill in tricking the wealthy, but advised him not to provoke them too much, as they might even kill him. Reflecting on everything that had happened in the last couple of days, he made some conclusions for himself. The hero responded that Ivan shouldn't worry about him, and that it was time for his side job now. A while later, they arrived at the venue where a concert was currently happening. Looking at the massive crowd, Robert asked Ivan puzzledly how much he thought they had spent on this show, to which Ivan cheerfully replied that he didn't care since he was only there to make some money. It was Marcus's first time at an idol concert, and he was pleasantly surprised by the girls' sharp and synchronized movements. When he mentioned how handy it was to run a few concerts and rake in loads of cash from all these idiots, Ivan just shrugged and said that not many girls are that skilled, so it's pretty standard. Giving his buddy a friendly nudge, the hero suggested he cool it a bit, or his future bride wouldn't be thrilled about his shady past. At that moment, one of the organizers came over and announced that it was almost their turn, then explained that the guys just needed to go on stage, make a few hand gestures, and then simply fall down. A few minutes later, a car parked near the stage. Out came a silver-haired man, a master of Qigong, Nikolai Noel, known as the strongest Tai Chi practitioner. Under the watchful eyes of the ecstatic crowd, he made his way to the stage. As soon as he got on stage, he clasped his hands behind his back and in a deep bass voice declared that today, as a Tai Chi practitioner, he had come to demonstrate his strength. Recently, someone on the internet had challenged his authority, so he decided to solidify it and dispel any doubts. In the middle of the crowd, Robert, noticing the man's age, said he'd be better off at home with his grandkids. Ivan, standing next to him, nodded in agreement and added that they shouldn't care because they were only here for the money and nothing more. Meanwhile, Nikolai continued, saying that although he couldn't directly explain the true power of the practitioners, he could demonstrate it. The hero was getting pretty tired of his speeches, and yawning, asked Ivan how soon their turn would come since it was a group performance, and they were the 7th and 8th in line. Ivan replied that he didn't know. Half an hour later, Nikolai had finished his speech and was now fighting his third opponent. As soon as he defeated him in just a few seconds, he turned to the audience again, saying that as soon as he enters a fight, his inner power immediately shocks his opponents. Then he asked the next 4 people to come up. Our heroes laughed openly the whole time, realizing how silly the whole setup looked. When they were told through the earpiece that numbers 5 through 8 should come up on stage, Robert was relieved. He was tired of waiting for his debut. A minute later, he went up on stage with 2 other guys and a fiercely determined Ivan, and mockingly reminded Nikolai of his earlier words about being able to handle anyone. The Qigong master turned to them and immediately took a defensive-offensive stance, saying that it didn't matter where the strikes came from, he could handle them all even with his eyes closed. Hearing his response, Robert smirked and said that in that case, he wouldn't hold back. Ignoring the scriptwriter's instructions on what exactly he needed to do, he charged at Nikolai with his fist raised to strike. However, Nikolai fell to the ground before our hero's fist could even reach him. The other 3 guys froze in place, shocked. Suddenly, Ivan got a brilliant idea. With a satisfied smile on his lips, he walked towards the old man, rolling up his sleeves, and declared that he wouldn't miss the chance to get involved. Then he started actively hitting the completely unresisting opponent. Robert, standing behind him, asked with confusion what he was doing since Nikolai had already fallen, to which he replied that it was a live broadcast and he needed to seize this rare chance to become famous. Suddenly, a loud voice called out, announcing the interruption of the broadcast. The guy who came onto the stage was furious and indignantly asked our heroes what on earth they had set up here and why they started a real fight. With not a hint of guilt in his voice, Robert replied that Nikolai fell on his own. He didn't even get to touch him, and added that if this old man is among the top 10 Qigong masters, he shouldn't be so weak, making their lie obvious even to a fool. Wilhelm just laughed at his words, asking Robert what kind of nonsense he was spouting, then explained that the old man was just an actor. He pointed towards the crowd of worried spectators, saying that all his punches were also just part of the act, aimed at boosting viewer numbers. After clearing things up, Wilhelm stated that they had to pay him compensation for the ruined show. Robert ignored his words and reached for a phone lying nearby. Seeing this, an irritated Wilhelm asked what he was up to. The hero smirked and replied that he had accidentally recorded everything that happened. Right after that, to prove his point, he played the recording where Wilhelm admits it was all just an act. Wilhelm's irritation quickly turned to horror and confusion. He hadn't seen this coming and was worried about how it might be used against him in the future. Robert stopped the recording and said that he understands the hustle, but exploiting a helpless old man was crossing the line. Clicking his tongue in annoyance, Wilhelm gestured for his guys to come over, saying our heroes shouldn't have meddled in his business, and almost immediately, 3 beefy goons climbed onto the stage. When they stopped behind him with menacing smirks, he said that escaping wouldn't be so easy now. While his guys were warming up their fists, Wilhelm ordered Robert to go into the gallery and remove everything. Seeing how serious the muscleheads were, our heroes tensed up involuntarily. As Robert frantically pondered what to do in such a dangerous situation, Ivan decided the best tactic was to strike first. Under our hero's puzzled gaze, he bravely lunged at one of the men, but the guy quickly caught his fist. Realizing he was no match, Ivan glanced at Robert and yelled for him to run. However, in the next instant, the 2 remaining muscleheads were flung aside. Then our hero dealt with the last one holding Ivan with just a single kick to the stomach. Ivan was utterly shocked by what happened and the monstrous strength of his friend. While everyone was still dazed and the muscleheads knocked out, Robert decided to seize the moment and bolted from there, grabbing Ivan by the hood. As Ivan, still shaken, ran further away from the crowd, he asked the hero where he had learned to fight so well. Robert just smiled and reminded him that he had already suggested they hit the gym and train together. So, as they talked about the benefits of training, they continued on their way. Meanwhile, back in his room, Nicholas was fuming over what had happened to him. The girl sitting next to him, looking through some papers, mentioned that the media got involved right after the live broadcast and local authorities were already handling a fraud case, warning that if it wasn't resolved soon, the company's stocks would suffer. Just then, Wilhelm walked into the room and declared that they still had a chance to turn things around and even boost their popularity significantly. He then looked at Nicholas and stated that only their great master Chin could pull this off. The man quickly caught on and suggested that he could make a statement claiming they were ambushed and that it was his own carelessness that got him trapped by those scoundrels. He also thought that it wouldn't hurt to give those 2 a good thrashing. A few minutes later, Wilhelm left Nicholas and headed to the director's office. A worried Amelia asked him what they would do if the video got leaked online and suggested they seek help from higher-ups. The guy knew they couldn't handle it alone and that he'd have to take drastic measures. Reaching for his phone, he assured his assistant not to worry about it. Meanwhile, sitting in her spacious office, Victoria got all the details about the situation from her video call partner. She really didn't like what she heard, especially the part about Wilhelm admitting on video that they were deceiving everyone. Her caller was in total panic because they were under tremendous pressure and didn't know what to do, with no other choice but to ask her for help. Victoria sighed irritably and standing up said she'd try to sort out the situation. After ending the call, she walked over to a subordinate by the door and ordered him to immediately find out where the guy with the video was. At the same time, our heroes moved to a busy street where they decided to grab a bite at one of the street stalls. Just as they started their dinner, a car pulled up beside them. The next moment, the front window rolled down slightly and the girl sitting there asked Robert to get in the car because they needed to talk about something. A surprised Ivan asked his buddy if he knew this rich beauty. The hero ignored his question and, thinking it was a new kind of showdown, told the girl he wasn't going to do it because he was busy with dinner and had no time for chats. Annoyed by his response, Victoria's subordinate suddenly jumped out of the car, slamming the door open, and demanded to know what Robert thought he was doing. But the girl cracked the door open and stopped him, saying maybe the guy was right, that dealing with such matters required patience and focus. Then she stepped out, arms folded across her chest. Turning to Robert, she said she'd get straight to the point and asked him to name his price for the video ransom. The hero knew the Claude family was influential in town and that its head worked in the entertainment industry. So he boldly assumed that since such a wealthy family's representative was handling this personally, she must know Nikolai. Victoria sat down opposite him and with a smile said that since he knew her, things would go much faster. Then she handed him a blank check and suggested he write down the amount he wanted. When he asked if he could really write any amount, Victoria replied that he could put down whatever he wanted, but if he refused to sell the video, she would have to resort to other methods. Robert smiled and said that in that case, he agrees. The girl, with a confident smile, watched the guy, happy that everything went so smoothly and that her father had worried about her abilities for nothing, since it's clear that people like him have no power, no influence, no money, and bribing him would be easy. As soon as our hero finished, he handed her the filled-out check. Smiling, Victoria, without even looking at the paper, took the check and said she was glad that Robert was so forthcoming. Having said that, she lowered her gaze to the check in her hand to see what amount he had written. However, as soon as she saw the $990,000 written there, her eyes widened in shock. Frowning, she looked at Robert and asked if this was a joke. In response, our hero tore the check with chopsticks and asked if such a trifle was beyond their means. Without waiting for Victoria's quite obvious response to him, he said with a smirk on his face, disappointed, that she had failed to meet his expectations. Therefore, the next moment he tore the check in half. This move really pissed the girl off, making her jump up from her seat. The guard lunged at Robert, telling him he was asking for death. But our hero had no trouble catching his arm. Deciding he needed to be tougher, he slammed the man's hand on the table and raised some chopsticks above it, terrifying his victim. Without a hint of hesitation, he next drove the sharp end of the chopsticks into the guard's hand, pinning it to the table's base and making the man scream in agony. Victoria, who was watching the scene, tensed up, shocked by the guy's strength and cruelty. As Robert pulled out the bloodied chopsticks, he stated that the Claude family was trying to claim what wasn't theirs. He then let go of the guard's hand, allowing him to collapse to the ground, and with a smirk in his voice, asked Victoria if she brought people because she was short on cash. The girl's face twisted in displeasure when she realized she had greatly underestimated him. Robert, not wanting to waste more time here, patted his friend on the shoulder and mentioned they hadn't finished their meal, suggesting they head somewhere more private. Watching those two goof around, Victoria promised herself she wouldn't let this slide and would definitely make Robert regret going against her family. Meanwhile, our hero recalled that once, early in their acquaintance, they had meat in a pot at a restaurant and suggested revisiting it to relive those memories. A few days later, Nikolai, having put on a couple of bandages for show, went live to explain the situation from his side, as planned. That video racked up a ton of likes and comments, but even so, it didn't affect the situation at all. Furious that some guy dared to dishonor his family, Sam flung his phone aside. Sam was the youngest member of the Claude family, and this whole situation really got to him. Turning to his sister, who was calmly sipping her coffee, he asked in bewilderment why she couldn't handle such a simple task and squash the issue. At that moment, a man sitting at the table intervened and sternly said that if Sam had been sober that day, his sister wouldn't have had to get involved. And moreover, they'd only have more problems if he decided to step in now. Hopper Claude, being the company's head, could look at the situation more calmly and objectively. After scolding his wayward son, he noted that if Sam continued to behave this way, he would never earn his grandfather's approval. Feeling her responsibility, Victoria stood up, bowed her head, and apologized to her father for her failure. In response, the man just sighed wearily and advised them both to start using their brains to avoid getting into such messes again. After pushing back his chair, he stood up and walked away from the table. He didn't expect much from them, so he just asked them not to let their granddad down. Victoria clenched her fists in frustration, because even though their family hadn't lost anything, their reputation had still taken a serious hit. Annoyed, she crushed her phone's screen with her heel, deciding she could do without that drama queen. Meanwhile, our hero and Angelica were on their way to an important event for her, chatting cheerfully about Nikolai's live stream. Reaching towards the guy's cheek, Angelica told him that Ivan had already spilled the beans to her and asked how long they had been planning this. Robert brushed off her questions, asking her not to distract him while he was driving. He didn't like that his rivals had started doing live streams that helped them rebuild their reputations, while his own video was being criticized, although it had its upside since it managed to trend. Thanks to Charlie and his popular app, He managed to get the video a lot of attention. But eventually, Wilhelm's team resolved this issue too. The only thing he couldn't understand was why the Claude family was doing nothing. He hardly believed they had just given up. After spending the rest of the drive lost in thought, he soon parked near the right building. Stepping out of the car, Angelica mentioned it was just her classmate's birthday party, so he didn't really have to come along. But sticking to his guns, Robert silently followed his friend. He couldn't help but worry about her, so he ended up tagging along. At the entrance, the birthday girl Vanessa, dressed in a white dress that accentuated her figure, greeted Angelica. Robert slowly approached the girls while his friend was congratulating the birthday girl. Right from the get-go, he noticed the sideways glances aimed at Angelica. Suddenly, all eyes turned to Catherine, who stepped forward and asked Angelica, puzzled, what she was doing here, wondering if she came to embarrass Vanessa again. Angelica turned to her and said, displeased that Catherine shouldn't push it. But Catherine cut her off, reminding her of the last time when Angelica was supposed to treat them, but then ran off in embarrassment. Their escalating argument began to draw more and more attention from the other guests at the event. Robert, hanging back, thought his girlfriend really shouldn't have gotten involved with Catherine and the other classmates, because now she was in for a rough time. Meanwhile, Angelica stepped up and, deciding to fight back, asked Catherine why she hadn't mentioned the little detail that she was the one who invited her to that dinner. Catching the girl off guard, she added that Catherine and her friends had ordered dishes just for themselves, and then called her, tricking her into coming to the restaurant, not wanting to pay on their own. And as soon as they saw her boyfriend had money, she invited the rest of her friends to eat for free. Faced with these accusations, Catherine couldn't come up with anything to counter because it was all true. Robert, quite satisfied, noted that Angelica had finally learned to stand her ground. Vanessa, deciding to intervene, touched her shoulder and unhappily asked Angelica to change her tone, reminding her that she had invited her to her own birthday and suggested she try to get along with the other guests present. Then the birthday girl asked if she remembered their classmate Sheila and mentioned that her husband is a very important person in town, and their fortune amounts to several hundred yuan. When Angelica heard Vanessa's words about how bending to Sheila would solve her job problems, she frowned in displeasure. She then looked at her friend with confusion and asked if she was only invited to be forced to bow down to someone. Vanessa let go of her shoulder and sighed deeply. The next moment, she firmly stated that people should realistically assess their situation and not try to punch above their weight. The girl shared that Sheila's husband had also helped her family by sorting out an issue with the textile factory. So she asked Angelica to agree and seize this opportunity, as it would help not only herself, but her as well. At that moment, Sheila, the subject of their discussion, entered the room arm in arm with her husband, Stephen Freem. Vanessa and Catherine, thrilled by their arrival, immediately rushed towards them, greeting the important guests. Seizing the moment, Robert approached Angelica and asked if Sheila was her rival, to which she nodded in agreement and mentioned that this girl had really climbed the ranks recently. Suddenly, their conversation caught the attention of the guests they were discussing. Sheila, along with Steve, approached our heroes and with a smile said that it had been a long time since they last saw each other. She then introduced them to her husband, the young Mr. Freem of the family that owns the city's main sewing factory. As praise for their lovely couple spread around the room, their smiles grew even wider and more self-satisfied, with one of the girls even saying she might have met Mr. Freem in a past life. Robert couldn't help but chuckle. Totally clueless about what triggered his reaction, 4 pairs of eyes stared at him in confusion as he tried to hold back his laughter. Giving up on trying to suppress it, the hero explained that he'd never heard such nonsense about past lives before. This explanation only led to disappointed and puzzled looks from the group. Suddenly turning serious, Robert glared at them and demanded why they kept sticking to his girl, asking if they were tired of living. His words slightly surprised Catherine and Vanessa, and the rest of the room burst into loud laughter. Turning to Angelica, Vanessa asked mockingly what was wrong with her boyfriend and if he even knew about the Frey family. Sheila couldn't resist making a jab at the girl either, saying that with such a dimwit she was bound to be miserable. Angelica wasn't about to let them insult Robert any further, so she stepped forward and sternly stated that her boyfriend was not a topic for their discussion. These words amused Sheila even more, and with feigned concern in her voice, she asked why her boyfriend couldn't help her find a decent job. Without waiting for a reply, she haughtily stated that being a freeloader isn't all that great, and that's exactly why you should be careful when choosing your partner. That's when Stephen chimed in, mentioning that the sales department was short a manager and, if Angelica was interested, he could easily sort it out for her. The offer did seem tempting to her, but the look on the man's face and the fact that he was her rival Sheila's husband made her wary. Trying to sway her to his side, Stephen offered to pay her 5 Lai. The price he mentioned shocked the girls in the room, who were once again amazed at how wealthy he was. Meanwhile, the man added that by accepting this offer, Angelica would be able to provide not only for herself but also for her family. And in addition to the previously mentioned 5 Lai, a bonus would periodically be added. As he said this, he reached out his hand, slowly moving closer. At that moment, Robert put his arm around his friend's shoulder and pulled her slightly to the side, letting the man grab at the air. Then he stepped forward, shielding the girl with his body, and declared that he earns hundreds of yuan a month, so they definitely didn't need Stephen's offer. Having said that, he grabbed Angelica by the hand and headed towards the exit, ignoring Sheila's angry shouts. She demanded her rival immediately kneel before her and admit she was nothing but scum, always doomed to work for others, or else she threatened to strip her of her job for life. Unable to take it anymore, Robert paused and, frowning in displeasure, advised her to stop spouting nonsense. Stephen stepped in for Sheila, stating that she was his girl and free to say whatever she wanted. He dirtily added that as long as the woman was obedient in bed, he'd fulfill all her wishes. Robert sighed wearily and, reaching into his inner pocket, confessed that people like them really got on his nerves. So, to show that his girl couldn't be messed with, he'd have to teach them a little lesson. Saying this, he dialed the necessary number. Hearing his request, Justin immediately burst into the information department's office and declared that his boss urgently needed to check on a girl named Sheila Copes. Giving the staff 10 minutes to gather information, he demanded they find out absolutely everything about her, from trivial details to major scandals, since she dared to go against Robert. Meanwhile, Sheila attacked our hero with a barrage of new accusations, trying to hit a nerve. When Justin's call came through on his phone, he smiled smugly and said that he was very interested to find out what skeletons she had in her closet. Right after those words, he answered the call on speaker, and the next moment a male voice filled the room, reading off all the info they found on the girl, starting with her gender, age, and residence. When it was revealed that she had been with 52 sexual partners, whose ages ranged from 28 to 68, the faces of the spouses twisted in confusion and anger. It was also mentioned that there were 34 instances where 2 men were in the girl's room at the same time, which shocked Vanessa and Catherine. Still smiling, Robert asked Sheila if she didn't think she had too many admirers. She angrily shouted back that it was all slander and that her lawyer would easily sue him for it. The hero smiled even wider, asking if that was so, and in the next moment, Sheila's face showed embarrassment and shock as Justin continued, revealing that last year she contracted an STD, recovered in May, but then got reinfected and had about 6 abortions in total. He didn't stop there and read out that she had booked 86 hotel rooms over the past year, the latest being rented yesterday, where from 1 in the afternoon to 9 at night several men were present, and as more information was revealed, Stephen's face grew darker. And when it was mentioned that one of those visitors was named Bishop Frey, our hero, recognizing the familiar surname, mockingly asked Stephen if he knew this man. Through clenched teeth, he hissed that it was his father, plunging the rest of the room into deep shock. Cornered, Sheila lunged at Robert and furiously demanded that he stop this immediately. But he quickly dodged to the side, lifting his phone above his head and letting the girl fall to the floor. When an enraged Stephen approached her, she looked up and glanced at him warily. Kneeling down, she began to plead for him to listen to her and kept insisting it was all a blatant lie. But he wasn't fooled by her sweet face, and after giving her a loud slap, he asked in disbelief how she could have been deceiving him all this time, messing around with so many men at once. Watching the family drama unfold, the satisfied hero ended his call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. A few minutes later, Sheila, unable to bear the cruelty, collapsed unconscious on the floor. He immediately shifted his focus from her to Robert, angrily declaring that their marriage was a sham anyway, so ending it wouldn't be a big loss. Boiling with rage inside, Stephen stared at the guy in front of him, trying to figure out how he managed to sniff everything out and drag his reputation through the mud, considering he's just a nobody. The next moment, he declared he'd deal with his ex-wife later, but first, he'd find a new girl for the role. And the first candidate in his mind was Angelica. Stephen figured it'd be a piece of cake to get rid of some broke dude and take his girl for himself. Robert stepped forward and, with a smirk, said he's even more pathetic than he looks, making the guy's face twist in anger. When he said a single phone call was all it would take to completely destroy our hero, Robert backed him up and asked what he was waiting for all this time. Shooting him scorching looks, the man with the phone stepped toward the window, while our hero couldn't wait to see his reaction when he finds out that he's pretty tight with the 4 rulers of the city. Stephen dialed the necessary number and demanded an immediate check on all information regarding Robert Neaton. When told there were quite a few people with that name, the annoyed man yelled to check everyone and call him back when they dig something up. However, deep down, he started to doubt that if they found nothing, it would mean this guy was better than him. Robert, who had heard the whole conversation, handed him his passport and said that should make his job easier. Stephen didn't turn down such generosity and grabbed the passport, saying that later on, the hero shouldn't regret his decision. A few minutes later, he finally got a call back, and with a gleeful smirk, told Robert to brace himself for the upcoming humiliation. He just shrugged indifferently and told Stephen to stop beating around the bush and answer the call. His total calm was seriously freaking Angelica out, but she couldn't ask anything yet. Steve took the advice and pressed the button to answer the call. He thoughtfully turned on the speakerphone and asked what they had managed to dig up on this guy. The moment the voice on the other end said that the higher-ups couldn't disclose the person's identity or provide any information due to insufficient clearance, everyone in the room was shocked once again. Robert, clearly mocking Steve from above, was impressed by his ability to dig his own grave. Deep down, he was thankful to Justin for his swift work, since no one else could have completely hidden information about him. Realizing he was defeated, Stephen staggered, grabbed his heart, and then Vanessa rushed over, concerned, asking if he was all right. She quickly glanced towards Sheila, deciding that since the young Mr. Fry was now free, she had to seize this opportunity. Vanessa was determined to secure the position of bride and was not about to back down. So, glaring angrily at Angelica, she accused her of causing a scene instead of being grateful for the birthday invite, ruining the whole party, and demanded that they leave immediately. An annoyed Angelica asked her if she really was going to kick her out and keep those 2. She yelled that insulting the Frey family was like insulting her own, and declared that after today, her family was no longer welcoming Angelica. Not planning to stick around any longer, the girl grabbed Robert's hand and headed for the exit, throwing in that they weren't close friends before, and definitely weren't now. But she had barely taken a few steps when she stopped dead in her tracks, surprised. Anna walked into the room with a small box in her hands, smiled at her, and said she was glad she got the party address right. Under the astonished gazes of the crowd and whispers about why she might be there, she confidently walked towards the birthday girl. As she passed by our heroes, Anna smiled, deciding to give the gift first and then reveal who it was from, hoping it would boost Angelica's reputation. Meanwhile, Robert whispered to his friend to keep smiling and not show any signs of trouble. He added that although he understands she didn't mean to put others in a tough spot because of her kindness, he wasn't as kind as her. When Anna approached Vanessa, she was clearly invigorated. Even Stephen stopped playing the deeply wounded guy and moved closer to them. Handing her the case, she gave the hostess a box and said that on behalf of an anonymous guest, she would like to present this gift to her. With congratulatory words, Anna opened the case, revealing a golden phoenix medallion. Surprised by such an expensive gift, the girl couldn't help but inquire about the anonymous giver's identity. She was sure it wasn't Stephen, because he simply couldn't afford something like that. Vanessa reached out to take her gift, thinking that she needed to find out who the sender was by any means necessary and, if it was a man, to establish a connection with him. However, at the last moment, Robert's loud voice called out to Anna. He told her to take the phoenix back. He believed that this girl wasn't worthy of such a gift. Standing next to Vanessa, Catherine was outraged and incredulously asked how such a broke guy like him dared to interfere at that moment. Vanessa, equally upset by what happened, looked at Angelica and asked how many more times during the evening she planned to interfere and create silly scenes on her birthday, especially in front of such an important person. She suddenly yelled at our heroes, telling them to get out of there immediately. Vanessa was confident that since Anna Davis herself had come here, she would soon reach great heights in the fashion world. The thought that even the Frey family would worship her thrilled her. The other guests backed up the hostess and in unison yelled for our heroes to leave the place. A confused Anna approached Robert and asked, not understanding what was happening. Had she said something wrong? Her question to him shocked and bewildered everyone. An agitated Vanessa approached Anna and cautiously asked why she decided to talk to him of all people. The thought that Robert knew such an important person shocked the girl, As she told Anna, they were at the very bottom. She gave the birthday girl a displeased look and said that it was Angelica who had asked her to give this phoenix to her. These words caused even more surprise and confusion for Vanessa. With a nervous smile, she asked if this was a joke. Robert turned towards the exit, telling Anne there was no need to talk to them since they had already been kicked out. Nodding in agreement, the girl turned away and joyfully grabbed Angelica by the arm. This gesture once again showed Vanessa that these two really knew each other and were on good terms. Trying to fix the situation, she ran towards the exit, calling out to Angelica and asking her not to leave. However, 2 security guards blocked her way, preventing her from leaving the hall. Trying to break through them, the girl continued to shout Angelica's name, saying she was mistaken and asking for forgiveness, as they were friends. With a sad expression and tears in her eyes, the girl turned to Vanessa and asked if they could really still be called friends after everything that had happened. Robert, with a comforting gesture, touched her shoulder. Then, without even looking at Vanessa, he said that he was giving her 2 hours to leave the town. He also warned that if he ever saw her again, she shouldn't blame him for what happens next. Hearing this, the girl collapsed to the floor, exhausted, realizing in horror that 2 hours was way too little time to sort out her belongings and leave town. As soon as they left the hall, away from prying eyes, Robert cheerfully slapped Angelica on the back and told her it was all finally over, so she could relax now. Watching the girl lunge at him with fists, Anna thought that although Angelica's troubles weren't that serious, she wouldn't get into any more trouble from now on. Remembering her, Robert winked at her and mentioned he had figured out feng shui and had arranged to meet Justin a bit later. He was planning to come up with something for Angelica, worried she might question his card balance, so he had already discussed with Anna about creating a story that he had become a feng shui master. Anna played along and replied that she would send the fee later. After saying goodbye to her, our heroes stepped out onto the street. On the way to the car, Angelica, battling her embarrassment, quietly thanked Robert for his help today. Pretending not to hear, he cupped his ear and cheerfully said the wind was too strong and he couldn't hear, asking her to repeat it. The girl immediately flared up with irritation and, pulling the guy by the ear, yelled at him to stop pretending, then asked why Anna had been so nice to him. Dodging her questions, the hero skillfully changed the subject, reminding her about her past desire to open a health food restaurant, and mentioned that it just so happened he had some money set aside that he could use to help her out. Angelica pushed him away, annoyed, saying that the money was obtained through deceit, so she wouldn't use it because she didn't want to feel guilty later. Her words just made Robert laugh. Pulling her closer, he said she shouldn't turn down the richest man in the world and miss such an opportunity. So, the very next morning, they both headed to a real estate agency. The hero followed his enthusiastic friend, yawning sleepily. As they approached the entrance of the building they needed, Angelica said that since Robert was such a big investor, he might as well buy the best and most suitable place. Inside, they were greeted by a man who was one of the real estate managers, who offered his assistance to our heroes. Robert explained that he was looking to rent a place. The man nodded and promised to find a suitable consultant for him. He then called over Chloe, who was standing nearby, and asked her to consult these guests, to which she reluctantly reminded him that she only serves VIP clients. Robert grimaced in distaste at her arrogance. The folks standing behind were chatting about how Chloe mostly takes on female clients and only occasionally high-ranking men, since she's the top salesperson. When the manager shot her a displeased look, gearing up to scold her, Robert cut in, thoughtfully asking why it even matters who the client is and why she can't just do her job properly. While they were discussing, Chloe threw a scornful glance at our hero, deciding he was just like most men, trying to get her attention. Suddenly, a cold metal soda can touched Robert's cheek. As he looked up at the smiling Angelica, she asked him which flavor he'd prefer. Seeing her, the other visitors started throwing mocking glances at Chloe, saying the girl next to this guy was clearly high class and well-figured. After finishing the conversation with Robert, the manager decided to leave Chloe alone and called over Erica. A while later, our heroes moved to another spot, where Erica told them that following Robert's request, she had selected an area of 538 square meters, also mentioning that the property included 2 floors. After finishing her explanation, she suggested drawing up a contract to either sell or lease the place if Robert liked it. When Angelica thoughtfully said it would be too expensive, Robert cut her off and said that the place was perfect for them and money was no issue. Nodding, Erica turned to the property owner, Christopher, and asked what he thought about it. He replied that he originally planned to use the space for his own purposes, but now his plans had changed, so if they wanted to rent the place, the set price was the best deal they could find. The consultant noticed a flicker of doubt on the guy's face and whispered that he was in a tough spot. Christopher's 2 kids were seriously ill, and he was spending all his money on their treatment, with one medication costing over 10 yuan, needing 4 of them, plus hospital expenses. After hearing her out, Robert felt sorry for the man and was about to agree to the rent, but he got interrupted. Chloe walked in with a blonde man, arrogantly saying they also came to check the place out, then explained that her client Peter just got back from the UK and wants to rent a bigger space. Christopher looked displeased at the pair and responded that he needed to discuss everything with the first clients before dealing with them. When Chloe started to object, Peter cut her off, told her to be quiet, and moved forward. Stopping in front of Angelica, he extended his hand and, with a smile, said he would be very pleased to meet her, adding that although he had lived in the UK for over 10 years, he had never met such a beauty. The girl hesitantly looked at the man's outstretched hand. When she responded with a sweet smile and a wave instead of placing her hand in his for a kiss, Peter was stunned and said it was no big deal. Angelica moved closer to Robert and quietly asked, confused, why Peter replied, "No big deal," to her greeting. Robert sighed heavily, tapped his temple, and suggested she think it over herself. At that moment, Chloe intervened, her voice tinged with reproach, explaining that Peter simply wanted to give Angelica a light kiss, and if she were more educated, she would have understood that. Defending his friend, Robert countered, saying it was just cultural differences, and added that well-mannered people usually don't kiss women who are taken. At his statement that it was an open display of rudeness and ignorance, Chloe's face showed indignation and irritation. She wanted to protest, but Peter cut her off, saying it was no big deal. He then looked around and remarked that he really liked this place, and other places didn't interest him as much anymore. When Angelica mentioned that they had also chosen this place, Peter smiled and said he'd let her have it, as he didn't want to compete with such a wonderful girl. Our heroes were surprised by his words, since Christian had already mentioned a queue. Meanwhile, Peter continued, asking if they had discussed the rent yet. When he said he could buy the whole building and rent it out to them, they looked at him like he was crazy. Christopher was actually pleased to hear that someone was planning to buy the whole building and asked Peter if he could really pull it off. Chloe explained that her client's father owns several design companies in the UK and China, and his income exceeds hundreds of yuan. Peter nodded in agreement, confirming her words, and said he had enough money, so no worries there. Christopher approached Robert with a guilty look and said that he had no choice but to hand over the building to Peter due to his situation. The hero smirked and said he never mentioned he was just going to rent the place. The surprised man looked at him and asked if that meant he wanted to buy the building too. Robert confessed that he had planned to buy it from the start, but before he could say it out loud, his friend next to him squeezed his hand tighter and asked with confusion what he was even thinking about. After hearing him out, Christopher said that in that case, according to the rules, he would give the house to his first clients, at which point Chloe intervened again, suggesting they hold an auction and sell to the highest bidder. Robert, fully confident in his victory, agreed to the proposal without any objections. Peter smiled, and also accepting the offer, asked Christian how much he wanted for the place. The excited man said he was in a rush to sell the house, so he'd settle for 15 yuan, though he'd normally go for 17. Peter was totally fine with the price he heard, so he decided to hike it up to turn things his way, considering he'd pay all 18 yuan for such a spot in this convenient neighborhood. Thinking this way, he smiled contently and said it was a reasonable price. The next moment, he offered 15.5 yuan, mentioning he could make a 50% down payment and cover the rest with a mortgage. The idea of buying the building, then leasing it to Angelica and getting closer to her was undoubtedly tempting for him. After making his offer, he turned to Robert, saying it was now his turn. Our hero put on a thoughtful face and barely had time to say anything when Angelica grabbed him by the shoulders. Apologizing to everyone, she said she needed to discuss something with him and asked for a couple of minutes, then headed for the exit with Robert. As soon as they were outside, she started scolding him for such a thoughtless and risky move as bidding. She was totally against him spending so much just for her little restaurant. Robert pinched her cheek and explained that she got it all wrong. He was just going to rent the place to her. He asked in surprise how she still couldn't grasp what that foreigner was up to. Catching her questioning look, the hero sighed, embraced her shoulders, and told her not to worry because he wasn't as reckless as she imagined. He just wanted to pay a high price to show those show-offs a thing or two. That's how he convinced his girlfriend there was nothing to worry about. A few moments later, they returned, and Robert, apologizing for the wait, announced they decided to continue the bidding. His words greatly annoyed Peter, who had already thought his rival was backing out. Stepping forward, he impatiently asked how much our heroes were willing to pay for the house. Robert smiled and, still holding his girlfriend, confidently declared he would give 100 yen. The amount he mentioned shocked Christina. Peter couldn't help but let out a short laugh. Smirking, he asked Robert to spare them such jokes and said there was no need for him to play the hero. At that, he paused for a moment, recalling a local saying. Then, adjusting his glasses, he mentioned that if he wasn't mistaken, the phrase "throwing dust in your eyes" would fit here. Chloe gave a venomous smile and, turning to Robert, asked him not to embarrass himself in their country, as the amount he mentioned sounded downright absurd. The hero expected such a reaction, so he pulled out a wallet he had prepared earlier and advised them not to jump to conclusions. Next, he took out a 100 yuan note, asking Chloe who exactly shapes the image of their country. Just the day before, while cleaning his house, a couple 100 yen had accidentally fallen out of a box, which he now decided to spend wisely to put this foreigner in his place. Extending the note forward, he asked if that was enough to make the purchase. Christian and the salesgirls had never seen such an enormous amount of money in person before, so they all froze in shock. Chloe was puzzled about where Robert could have gotten such money. When Angelica peeked out from behind the guy and asked why everyone was silent, the hero quickly hid the note, deciding she better not see it, and asked her to be patient. After that, he turned to Peter, suggesting they continue their bidding. Given what he had seen, the man was confused because he knew he didn't have enough money to compete with Robert, and continuing the bidding would only dig himself deeper. Accepting his defeat, Peter clapped his hands and said that he now sees his rival is not from a poor background either. Trying to hide his true feelings behind a nervous smile, he tried to jab at the guy, saying that if he keeps spending money recklessly, he'll quickly blow through his parents' savings, so out of concern for them, he wouldn't raise the price. Then he turned to Christina, asking for his opinion. Frankly, Robert was deeply disappointed that the foreigner gave up so quickly, as he was hoping for a more exciting battle. Sighing, he said that 100 yen isn't that much, so there's really nothing to talk about. Then he pointed at the surprised Peter, saying that he wasn't in a position to talk about his family budget. Pulling out his wallet again, he took out a 100 yuan bill and said he'd pay the whole amount right now. Robert stood opposite Christian and, placing the bill in his hand, explained that he was giving the money not just to buy the property, but to help treat his sick children. The man looked down at his palm in disbelief and astonishment. Meanwhile, Robert shifted his gaze to Erica and asked if that money would be enough for the meds, to which the surprised girl gently nodded. Smiling, he told Christian that this was just a small part of how he could help him in this situation, so he asked him to accept his help. Touched by his generosity, the man fell to his knees. Tearfully, he began to thank him. Not expecting such a reaction, our hero was slightly taken aback and asked Christian to get up from his knees. Suddenly, a system pop-up appeared in front of him, stating that he would only receive 100 points because he was intentionally aiming to gain points through big spending. Standing aside, Peter coughed and said that the homeowner should thank him too. Stepping forward, he justified his demand by saying that if it weren't for him, Robert wouldn't have raised the price to 100 yuan, so there's someone else's merit in his good deed. The hero grimaced in displeasure and asked how he could stoop so low. Approaching the foreigner, he said that he shouldn't try to pose as a hero in this situation, since his spending had nothing to do with Peter, and added that the man himself would hardly have done something similar if the price had been set lower. Peter couldn't respond to that statement because Robert was right. His family couldn't just blow 100 yen like that. Realizing this guy was out of his league, the man decided it'd be best to steer clear of him in the future to avoid any trouble. With those thoughts, he rushed out of the building, followed by Chloe trying to stop her client. As soon as they left, Robert turned to Erica and asked her to get all the necessary paperwork done. A couple of hours later, our heroes finally sorted out all the formalities and were strolling through the city. An excited Angelica asked how much the rent would be for her. In response to her question, the hero asked how much she could afford. She demanded, quite annoyed, that he just name a price so she could start saving up. Robert laughed and told her not to worry about it since he hadn't really taken a hit, having used his feng shui teaching money. Naturally, Angelica didn't believe him and, swinging her fists, yelled for him to stop lying to her. The hero easily dodged her punches and was about to spin another tale to calm her down. However, at that moment, something else caught his attention. Specifically, a red-haired woman in a blue sleeveless dress. Robert was really surprised because her figure from behind seemed painfully familiar to him. Distracted by her, he stopped dodging Angelica's punches, which led her to smash her face into his chest. She stepped back from him and, rubbing her bruised nose, asked Robert what was up with him and why he stopped so suddenly. Apologizing, he said he had some urgent matters to attend to and took off at full speed after the mysterious woman who had disappeared into an alley. He was sure he recognized her, but this only raised more questions, since the woman he knew had been dead for a long time. A few moments later, he managed to spot her figure ahead. The hero called out to the woman, asking her to stop. When he uttered the word "Mom," the woman slightly smiled, not turning her head. And in the next moment, she sped up significantly and ran further away. Robert was blown away by her speed. No matter how hard he tried to catch up, putting in all his effort, he just couldn't do it, even with 1,500 points invested in his stats. After a while, the woman stopped when she hit a wall. Finally catching up, Robert demanded that she turn around and show her face, but she wasn't about to give up that easily. So with a couple of quick jumps, she overcame the obstacle and leaped onto the roof, quickly disappearing. Frustrated, our hero clenched his fists tightly. Looking around, he noticed a camera hanging above him. Obsessed with uncovering this woman's identity to confirm his suspicions, Robert soon burst into the security office of the nearby building and laid down some yuan on the table. He then demanded that the man give him all the footage from their security cameras and make copies. As soon as everything was ready, Robert headed towards the exit. The guy who gave him the copies contacted his higher-ups almost immediately after the kid left and reported that someone who had caught their attention before had come by. A little later, the Claude family members gathered again in the office where they were reviewing the video footage taken near their hotel. Victoria mentioned that her subordinates had contacted her and informed her that Robert had acquired this footage. Claude, sitting in his chair, thoughtfully clasped his hands together, pondering this information, and asked his daughter if she knew this woman. Victoria stood up and, placing a small envelope with information on his desk, told him that she had previously been interested in a secret organization. Although they gathered only a little information, it was enough to confidently suggest that this woman was one of the protectors. When Claude asked her to elaborate, she explained that this was very ancient information that acted as bodyguards, but they couldn't identify this particular woman's identity. The man listened to his daughter while simultaneously reviewing the information provided. Besides everything mentioned above, the girl also made sure to mention that there was suspiciously little information on Robert as well, leading her to suspect that these two might be connected, and if so, dealing with him wouldn't be so simple. Sam, who had been quietly standing aside until now, perked up and excitedly said that all they needed to do was bring in a few more people and use their connections to solve this problem. Victoria agreed with the strategy he proposed, but warned that they needed to act very carefully to avoid any trouble, ideally setting someone influential against Robert. Claude set aside the papers and reached for a cigar. Lighting up his cigarette, he thoughtfully said that if it's true Robert is one of the defenders, then this will be very valuable information for other corporations, and then the price on this guy's head will skyrocket and a real hunt will begin. Meanwhile, our hero, without wasting any time, left the city, calling Angelica to let her know he needed to briefly return to his hometown, and she could get acquainted with the business for now. As soon as he hung up, he sighed tiredly, guiltily saying that she must be furious and dissatisfied because of his spontaneous decision. Louise, who was driving, cautiously asked where they were headed now. Robert replied, looking out the window at the scenic expanses, that they were going to his home. For a few minutes, he indulged in nostalgia since he hadn't been here in quite a long time. Although he had heard that this little town had been developing actively lately, he didn't pay much attention to it because this time he came only for his mother and didn't plan to stay long. Suddenly, Louise stopped, surprised to see a barrier ahead with a small group of locals standing near it. An old woman who approached Robert's window said that if they wanted to pass, they had to pay 5 lei. For the hero, it was chump change, so he handed her the money without a word. Right after that, with a greedy smile on her face, she let them drive on. When Louisa expressed her concerns about the legality of what had happened, he told her to ignore it because those people just mistook them for tourists and decided to rip them off. They didn't get far before they had to stop again. Another group of people armed with farming tools blocked their way. Louisa looked at the guy next to her and asked what they should do. He just smirked and said that this was starting to get on his nerves. He then told her to kill the engine while he'd go out and have a chat with the villagers. A woman, with her hands clasped behind her back, walked around the car to Robert's window and said they wouldn't get through that easily. After a smug smile, she explained that the road was toll and they needed to pay 8 Lai. Louisa protested, saying they had just paid, while our hero, frowning, asked when he ever said he was traveling. His words really ticked the woman off. She leaned close to the glass and shouted that she didn't care, and if they didn't pay, they could just turn around and go back. Annoyed, Robert abruptly opened the door, not caring that he almost pinched the woman's hand, and pressed her, asking if she really thought he couldn't get past. In response, the woman pointed to a blood puddle nearby and said he wasn't the first to refuse cooperation, and if the hero wanted to take a chance and go solo against 10, he could try. At that moment, a burly man with a beam in his hands approached her, cheerfully saying they've been fussing around too long. Right after those words, he raised the beam above his head to strike, declaring that all trespassers must be eliminated. As soon as the man took a step towards him, Robert grabbed his face with his palm and disdainfully stated that money had completely blinded them. The man tried to pull his hand off, but it was no use because his opponent was too strong. Frowning, Robert stated he had no intention of being soft on people like them and delivered a sweeping kick to the man's leg. He screamed in pain and doubled over, clutching his injured limb. 2 men standing aside with hammers rushed towards the guy to avenge their mate. But Robert dealt with them quite easily, too. Knocked out from the blows, they collapsed to the ground. By now, everyone else had come running to the noise. The guy leading the squad pointed at the dude in front and ordered the rest to snatch the car and dump the kid into the ravine. Hearing this, Robert got even angrier and, turning to them halfway, asked if that was any way to behave. Freaked out by what was happening, Louise decided they couldn't handle it alone and quickly dialed her boss, Justin. Moments later, Robert climbed back into the car and said they could go. Before touching the steering wheel, the girl asked the hero if he was all right. He replied that these guys were no match for him, just a couple of fractures apart. Margaret couldn't just give up, so she blocked their way again and shouted with reproach that he not only hadn't paid for the road, but had also beaten up ordinary folks, so she wouldn't let him pass unless it was over her dead body. Robert clicked his tongue in annoyance and told Louise to just drive on. He'd take care of the consequences. She had no choice but to listen to him. Seeing the car approaching, Margaret quickly jumped aside. But at the last moment, the wheel painfully crushed her foot. The woman screamed loudly in agonizing pain. That's how she ended up falling to the ground, curled up. A few hundred meters later, our heroes were blocked again. An old man ahead shouted to the others to immediately surround the car and not let this guy get away. Quite tired of these annoying locals, Robert got out of the car again and asked what they wanted. The men shouted in unison that they had to pay for the wonderful landscapes around and demanded 1 mao, otherwise they threatened to call the police. Hearing the price, Robert couldn't help but laugh, thinking that if he were in the old world, he wouldn't give these people a dime. He then looked over the crowd in front of him and said he'd rather give the money to community needs than to any of them. When he threatened to maim everyone present here and then sue for extortion, the men's displeasure and irritation only grew. Noticing their aggressive mood, the hero beckoned them over with a finger, saying if they were so confident they could try to attack. The whole crowd roared with anger and indignation towards him. No sooner had the old man taken a step towards Robert than a wooden stick flew out of nowhere, knocking him off his feet. The blond man, leading a crowd of baton-wielding subordinates, asked in confusion what they were up to. Casting a threatening glance at the quieted crowd of villagers, Michael declared that such arrogance wouldn't go unpunished. As he reached out to his subordinate, the latter silently handed him a baton, just as one of the villagers approached to explain the situation. But Michael was ruthless, striking the man in the head with the baton forcefully, asking who allowed him to speak. As soon as the man collapsed to the ground unconscious, Michael snorted in displeasure and walked over to Robert. Bowing, he apologized for the incident and mentioned that Company O had come to assist him. From the company name and the man's mentioned name, he realized he was facing the head of the famous O family. Guessing that Louisa had somehow managed to warn him was not hard. Now the hero understood why Justin had specifically sent her to work with him. Nodding to Michael, Robert walked to the car door and asked him to check how many toll stops were in this area and to recover all the stolen money. The man bowed again to the hero and assured him that he would take care of everything. Right after that, the car started moving. Louise said with relief that they were really lucky to have help arrive just in time. Robert agreed and thanked her for her quick thinking. Half an hour later, they approached a solitary house, and seeing it, Louise asked Robert if it was the right house. He sadly confirmed it was, and noticing the change in his mood, she asked worriedly if everything was okay. He brushed it off, saying everything was fine and that he just remembered a problem. So they drove a bit closer, stopping right at the gates. Grabbing the gifts they had prepared earlier, he and Louise got out of the car, with Robert cheerfully calling out to his brother who was ahead. He knew Dave had always been against his business ventures and had even cut ties during their last conversation. But he hoped his brother wouldn't turn him away immediately, since they were still family after all. When Robert stopped in front of his brother and handed him the boxes, saying they were gifts for him and his fiancée, Dave flinched in surprise and gratefully accepted the boxes. But in the very next moment, his calm expression twisted into irritation, and shooing his brother away, he snapped that he could provide for his family himself, and Robert should rather focus on his girlfriend and buy gifts for her. Louise, standing nearby, politely apologized and told Dave that he was mistaken. She wasn't his brother's girlfriend. He didn't comment on that. Instead, he turned toward the house and loudly called out to his wife, saying that his prodigal brother had come back home. Watching him, Robert sighed with relief, relieved that Dave was no longer mad at him. A few moments later, the front door opened and a joyful Emma peeked out, asking if he really had returned. She quickly pushed her husband standing in front of her aside and approached Robert. When she noticed Louise standing nearby, she asked with a hint of displeasure why he hadn't warned her earlier, as she was totally unprepared for any introductions. Louise blushed deeply and looked down at the ground, saying they all got it wrong. But Emma ignored her words and, pushing Robert aside, invited the girl inside. The hero decided to use this moment to have a talk with his brother. Sighing, Dave spoke first and dryly asked what had happened again for him to decide to come back. After a brief silence, Robert shared that he had seen their mother. These words greatly surprised his brother, who gave him a puzzled look and asked what he meant. After giving him the full lowdown on what happened, our hero added that he even had video footage from the cameras, but still couldn't figure out who this woman really is. As soon as he finished his story, he shot a suspicious glance at his brother, who had been silent the whole time, and asked if he had told him everything about their parents' death. Dave sighed heavily and, heading towards the house, asked Robert to wait for him here a little longer. From his gloomy expression, our hero figured his brother was holding something back. A couple of minutes later, Dave came back out to him. Stopping next to Robert, he handed him a ring. While our hero looked puzzled at the ordinary-looking ring, Dave revealed that he found it by accident in their mom's jewelry box. At that moment, Robert's attention was caught by a sword engraved on one side of the ring. Dave then seriously said that it was indeed time to tell him everything, starting with the fact that a strange man, claiming to be a close friend, handled their parents' cremation. He vividly remembered his striking feature, a noticeable scar on his eyebrow. After hearing him out, Robert admitted that he hadn't shared everything either, and told about how he saw this woman jump 3 to 4 meters high, something only ghosts or martial arts masters could do. Seeing his brother's stunned face, the hero smiled and told Dave not to worry about it because he would handle everything himself. Frowning, Dave asked how he planned to track her down without any resources or connections, and immediately protecting his brother from trouble, advised him to better spend that time looking for a job. Robert put his arm around his shoulder and said that he understood why he was worried and assured him that there was absolutely nothing to worry about now, as he had made a lot of money and would soon transfer him an amount that should cover him for a while. To this, Dave replied in an annoyed tone that he was just worried about our hero becoming a burden on him, and warned that if he ended up on the streets again, he shouldn't even think about showing up here. When Robert said he would transfer 500 wen for starters, Dave didn't believe him and said he couldn't even spare 5 fen. But moments later, he received a notification of the 500 wan deposit, shocking him. The next day, the hero helped his brother buy a brand new car. With their purchases in tow, they headed towards home. Hearing Dave's voice, Louise and Emma came out to the street, and Emma advised Robert to take a break since he rarely visits and is already up to his ears in work. Taking the purchases from his hands, she and her husband carried them into the house. The hero sensed something off about his daughter-in-law, so he looked at Louise worriedly and asked what was up with Emma. The girl replied that her relatives had called and told her that the future of the family depended solely on her. No sooner had she shared this than a loudly laughing woman approached the gates with her son. Robert turned towards her voice. Madeline briefly greeted him and said she was heading to Emma and suggested our hero should also come inside because she needed to discuss something with his brother. As he walked past Louise, Duke let his gaze linger on her body a bit longer than usual. Stepping behind Robert, she asked him discontentedly who those two were, and he replied that they were Emma's relatives, who, unfortunately, were a bit too pushy. Madeline entered the living room and settled down with her son on a small sofa across from her sister and Dave. Duke, totally uninterested in the conversation, immediately dove into a mobile game. Madeline started the conversation by mentioning that her family was facing some problems and asked if they could possibly help her out a bit. At that moment, Robert walked in and reproachfully said he had thought she just came to visit the family. Trying to play it cool, Madeline replied that they indeed came to visit and also to ask for some help. When she mentioned that Robert could help too, he raised an eyebrow and asked how exactly he could be of use. Madeline pointed to her son, engrossed in his game, and shared that a friend of hers recently introduced her daughter to Duke, and they got along well, but they don't have a car, apartment, or job, so it's hard to talk about a future. Robert smiled and agreed, saying that it was indeed unfortunate. Building on her point, Madeline stood up from the couch and said that since they all live well and our hero even owns his company, they must have a lot of money, which she asked to share with her. She assured them that she and her son didn't need much. Just 2 yuan would be enough. Hearing this, Emma jumped up from her seat, baffled, and asked what she was even talking about. She vividly remembered that Madeline still hadn't returned the money she had borrowed earlier, and everyone knew Duke was into gambling, so she couldn't just give in and lend her the money again. A look of displeasure crossed Madeline's face, and she reminded Emma that they were still part of the same family, so she saw nothing wrong in borrowing some money from a family member. At that moment, Robert chimed in, saying that Aunt Madeline was right. They could give 2 mao for the wedding, but they'd need at least 1 mao for the banquet, plus other expenses that would add up to another 2 mao. After tallying up the total, he agreed to lend her 4.5 mao interest-free, but only if Madeline would pay it back within 5 years. Duke immediately tore away from the phone and jumped up on the couch, asking if he was really going to do it. Clinging to the shining opportunity on the horizon, Madeline asked why Robert was pinching every penny, especially since it seemed like he had made a ton of money after starting his business. The hero sat down on a chair, smiled, and replied that he couldn't even count all his money, but she shouldn't worry about it. He knew exactly what game this woman was playing, so he decided to play along a bit and see how far she would go. She continued on the topic she started, asking why she should return the money if he had so much. Without waiting for his response, she suggested that instead of returning the money, he could hire her son as the financial director in his company. Duke, excited by the idea, nodded in agreement, saying he could handle it. Robert smiled sarcastically and said that Duke couldn't even count to 100, so how could he manage in finance? Duke countered, saying that it's easy to learn, and he was sure the hero was so rich that he wouldn't notice if a few yuan went missing when he became the financial director. Standing up from his seat, he began to approach Robert, saying he really wanted to learn in the company from his relatives, and wouldn't mind at all if the sister standing nearby would coach him. Duke decided that Louise must be Robert's secretary, so thinking that all of the hero's wealth should come to him, he decided he wanted to take this girl too. When the guy reached out towards Louisa, the hero grabbed his wrist and squeezed it tight. He then sternly stated that his last name was Neaton, and Duke's was Chester, so they definitely couldn't be related. After tossing him aside, Robert mentioned that his company turns over tens of thousands of yuan a month, and asked if Duke had ever even heard of such figures before. Madeline immediately rushed to her son and, defending him, said that he wasn't that bad, so the hero could well give him a chance. Also, on the edge of irritation and anger, she asked why, being such a rich man, he couldn't just give them those measly 4.5 mao for free. Robert smirked maliciously and replied that now he wouldn't give them anything at all because they didn't deserve it. Duke, getting back on his feet, started attacking him with various insults. As Robert started warming up his fists, he was done tolerating this circus and demanded that they leave the house and not even think about coming back, unless they wanted to leave with broken bones. Furious, Madeline hissed through her teeth that he had made his choice. As she ran out of the house, she yelled back that he would soon be singing a very different tune. After saying that, she fell to her knees and screamed for help as loud as she could, claiming there was a real scoundrel here who wouldn't give money to his poor relatives. The neighbors nearby heard her loud cry. As people started gathering around their house, Robert grumpily said that Madeline should stop this one-man show. Soon, there was a whole crowd of agitated neighbors outside their house. Suddenly, a white car parked nearby. Everyone immediately recognized the man who got out as the head of the Forrest family. Gilbert quickly spotted Robert and, approaching him, shook his hand with joy, saying how glad he was that such a prominent businessman hadn't forgotten his roots. Madeline got up from her knees and puzzledly asked how this guy looked like a businessman when he wouldn't even lend money to family, despite her family taking him into their home. The angered woman then turned to Gilbert, saying that he should be defending the interests of his citizens, as a leader should. Emma countered her, saying they always gave her money whenever she asked. Yet she never paid them back, especially since Robert had just mentioned he would lend her 4.5 mao. Madeline couldn't let her sister spill all the beans, so she lunged at her with a furious roar. But before she could reach Emma, Robert stepped forward and slammed her into the ground with one swift move. Then he mockingly asked where she was rushing off to, scared that the whole truth might come out. Duke didn't stand aside either. Grabbing a hefty stone from the ground, he ran towards our hero, puzzled, asking how he dared to touch his mother. Without much effort, Robert knocked the guy down with just one quick strike. With a reddened cheek, Duke collapsed on the ground next to his mother. Having cleared all obstacles, Robert told his daughter-in-law that she could now continue peacefully and no one would dare interrupt her again. She picked up right where the hero had agreed to give money, but for Madeline, that wasn't enough, and she wanted to install her little son as the CFO in his company. When she also mentioned how, after her father's death, Madeline had deprived her family of more than 10 acres of land, and as soon as she married Dale, she started demanding a second ransom. The woman clenched her teeth in displeasure that Emma decided to lay it all out. With every minute, Emma's words grew harsher and harsher. Dale held her back when she wanted to throw punches at her sister, telling her she shouldn't get so heated. Robert apologized to Zach for having to witness that scene and said that since he was here, they had something to discuss. After getting a nod of agreement from the man, the hero pulled out 100 yuan from his wallet, mentioning that the Lotus District was his home, where he was born and raised. But unfortunately, many places were in need of repair, which wasn't always financially feasible. Therefore, on behalf of himself and his brother, he wanted to allocate 100 yuan for the repairs. Surprised, Robert accepted the money, although he had already heard rumors that someone had dealt with the blocked roads. But he never imagined it would be this young guy, who was also financially supporting them. He turned to the gathered residents and loudly declared that all this money would be spent wisely, and all accounts would be open and transparent. The crowd enthusiastically reacted to this news and thanked Robert for it. Madeline moved a bit closer to her son, who was holding his face, and asked worriedly if he was all right. Duke didn't hear her question because he was completely absorbed in thoughts of getting both Robert's money and his woman, no matter what it took. Within an hour, the crowd dispersed to their homes, and our heroes returned to theirs. A while later, Louise popped into Robert's place and told him that Emma had prepared dinner and was asking him to come. Suddenly, at that moment, a loud shout came from the entrance, calling for our hero. Duke didn't waste any time, and after connecting with the right people, came back. A few moments later, Leroy kicked the door down with a single blow. Upon seeing Robert, Duke pointed at him and yelled that he was the one who not only didn't pay up, but also beat him up. The hero frowned unhappily at the sight of these uninvited guests. At the noise, Emma quickly came out, armed with a bat, along with Dave, who threateningly asked who was there to mess with his brother. As soon as Emma spotted Duke's blonde head, she stopped in front of him and sternly asked how he dared to come back. Leroy shifted his uncertain gaze to the annoyed Duke and reminded him that they had only agreed on Robert and didn't even discuss the others. It was only now that the man realized this kid had some screws loose, because if they did what he asked, they'd be in a world of trouble. With a click of annoyance, Duke said he'd handle it himself and snatched the bat from Leroy's hands. Then he charged at the hero with the weapon raised over his head, loudly screaming that they just needed to kill everyone and bury them quietly, then no one would ever know. As soon as he got close to Robert, the guy grabbed his hand and said that Duke forgot about one important thing, namely his promise to break all his bones if he or his mom showed up here again. Backing up his words with action, he swung and kicked the guy right in the groin. Hearing his agonizing scream, Leroy and his crew instinctively clenched their legs together, imagining just how painful that must be. Gradually, Duke's scream, as he lay on the floor, turned into a faint whimper. Leroy's guys turned around when they heard an angry voice behind them. Michael angrily asked who they even were to dare target his master, and pointing at them, he ordered his men to deal with them. A couple of minutes later, all the uninvited guests had received a couple of solid blows and were now forced to sit on the ground, hands behind their heads, not daring to even twitch. When Robert answered Michael's question about who caused him trouble by saying they all did their part, The man ran his finger across his throat and suggested just getting rid of them all or beating them so bad they'd need years to recover. The hero replied that they were too pathetic, so they weren't worth the effort. Plus, Emma was still his relative, and she wouldn't want such a fate for her nephew. Duke immediately seized on his words and began to beg for mercy, suggesting they just peacefully part ways and forget all about what happened. Thinking about the kid's future, Robert approached him and noticed he had a solid build, just lazy, and said he'd be great for a job. Michael was really bummed about the verdict. But Robert, knowing better than anyone, said this challenge would be tough for Duke, so he asked Michael to get him a job on a construction site doing the dirtiest, most exhausting work, and to assign 2 guys to beat him every time he showed any laziness. When Duke heard that the guards could also beat him every time he smoked, gambled, used his phone, and then ship him off to another construction site after this one, he started thinking death might have been the better option. Dale, Emma, and Louise were all smiles, happy with the punishment Duke got. Finishing up, Robert stood up and said he had to go and they could take the guy away. Approaching him, Michael asked what to do with the rest. The hero thought for a moment and said to send them for re-education, and if that didn't work out, just get rid of them. Hearing this, Leroy, who didn't want to die so young, shouted out that they would definitely reform. Robert sighed wearily and said to get out of there. He didn't need to repeat himself twice. The men instantly jumped up and almost tumbled away. As soon as everything was settled, Dale rushed to his younger brother. After staying a few more days, Robert and Louise decided it was time to head back. The hero really appreciated the girl's skills and said he'd ask Justin if he could hire her full-time once they got back. Louise was glad she had earned her trust and believed that if she worked even harder, she would definitely achieve greater success. Lost in thought, she didn't notice a motorcyclist darting right in front of her car. They couldn't avoid the fatal collision. The man was thrown from the shattered motorcycle and hit the ground, while our heroes ended up with a smashed windshield and a dented hood. Louise was too shocked to say anything, while Robert recognized the hitman as the legendary racer known as the Wandering Flame. Sighing tiredly, he grabbed his head and wondered why so many problems fell to his lot. Sometime later, they arrived at the nearest hospital. Robert gave his statement to the arriving officer and took care of all the necessary paperwork. After handing over the papers to the man, he reassuringly placed his hand on the worried Louise's shoulder and assured her that everything would be fine. They were really lucky that the racer only broke his leg and nobody died. The guilt-ridden girl turned to the officer and asked if she could meet the injured man. Robert noticed a shadow of doubt on the officer's face, so he said that they were really upset about what had happened. Seeing the care he showed for her, Louise smiled gratefully, thinking about how incredibly kind he was to her. A few moments later, the angry parents of the injured man came out of the room and started hurling accusations at our heroes. They were stopped by the officer, who reminded them that they were in a hospital, not a marketplace, so they needed to keep it down. But the man ignored his words and shouted that his son was almost killed, so he had every right to express his outrage. He then pointed at the couple in front of him, saying that he would not only demand money from them, but also sue them both to get them behind bars. Robert smirked and soothingly patted Louise on the head, saying that everything would be all right. After that, he told the man that he initially planned to cover all medical expenses if the other party admitted some fault. But now he would not only save money, but also restore justice. The woman immediately went into a deep hysterics, and Rudolph demanded that the officer make those responsible for his son's injury not only pay all the bills, but also compensate for the damage caused. Contrary to his expectations, Milton replied to the man that it was actually they who should pay, because the fault for the incident lies entirely on their son. The officer explained that Rudolph's son was driving without a license and was not following traffic rules, and that reckless driving itself is already a crime. But the man didn't care about the accusations made against him. He was determined to stick to his guns, stating that he just wanted those who hit his son to simply be held responsible, as the driver is always at fault in an accident. Our heroes couldn't help but be amazed at the level of stubbornness of this man. When the woman was about to throw punches at the officer, loudly screaming that her son almost died, so Milton must take their side, because if those two aren't jailed, the number of victims will increase. But Rudolph stopped his wife from making that mistake. Milton's angry voice could be heard even outside the hospital walls. Quite beside himself, he asked the relentless parents if they even knew how many people, like their son, are currently in this hospital. And he declared that if they want compensation, they'll get it. But first they have to pay all the other victims, and with these words, he managed to calm the couple down. Remembering the heroes still standing there, Milton said he was done with them and that they could leave now. So they finally left the hospital. Louisa was feeling pretty down because of the whole situation. Robert put his hand on her shoulder, pulled her close, and told her everything was sorted, so no more worries. He totally got that facing something like this would definitely bring her mood down, so he suggested they stay and relax in this town for a bit. When he proposed grabbing some food and staying at a hotel, she responded with a nod of agreement. At dinner, Robert allowed himself a bit of wine as a treat to unwind from the stress of the past few days. As soon as they got to their pre-booked room, the hero realized the day's troubles weren't over yet. He looked around the room in confusion, seeing one huge round bed and a small sofa. A sly smile from the receptionist flashed through his mind as she had told him all the single rooms were taken and offered a double instead. Robert was horrified to realize that the girl had gotten it all wrong. Blushing with embarrassment, Louise said he could take the bed and she'd be fine on the couch. The hero sighed heavily and lay down on the couch, telling her not to worry about it and to get a good night's sleep in the comfy bed because they had a long journey ahead tomorrow. Louise nodded, then, blushing even more, hesitantly asked if she could take a shower. Robert's face flushed as an involuntary image of the girl in the shower popped into his mind. Turning his face to the back of the couch, he replied that she could do whatever she wanted since it was their room to share. With permission granted, Louise didn't hesitate and headed straight for the shower. Soon the sound of water hitting the tiles could be heard. Robert tried to fall asleep, but the provocative situation made it incredibly difficult, and he regretted having drunk alcohol, which made it harder to control himself. Suddenly, the image of an enraged Angelica clenching her fists popped into his head. A few minutes later, the sound of water stopped, and the girl, dressed only in a thin shirt, stepped out of the shower. But Robert didn't even stir. Wiping her wet hair, a flustered Louise hesitantly called out the hero's name. Without lifting his head, he gestured towards the bed, saying it was time to sleep. Robert remained in the same position, while Louise, after turning off the light, climbed into the spacious bed and covered herself with the blanket. Due to a whirlwind of thoughts, she couldn't fall asleep, worrying about the trouble she had caused him several times in the past days. Yet he never blamed her. Instead, he cheered her up, so she pondered how to repay him. After lying there a bit longer, she sat up in bed and asked if Robert was asleep. When he replied that he wasn't, she peeked from under the blanket and slowly moved to the edge of the bed, asking if he wasn't cold on the couch. Unable to think of any other way to repay Robert, Louise, fighting her embarrassment, decided to make the first move. Hearing a strange rustle, the hero also sat up and, looking towards the bed, asked what was going on there. However, seeing Louise wrapped up in the blanket like a cocoon, he guessed she was playing some kind of game. Suddenly, she threw off the blanket and jumped onto the couch with Robert. Robert didn't resist her persistence, so they ended up not getting much sleep that night, just as he had initially planned. The next morning, right after they woke up and had a quick breakfast, they hit the road. This time, Robert took the wheel himself. After what had happened between them last night, he felt a bit awkward riding with Louise. Pondering how to break the tense silence, he suddenly remembered how funny she looked wrapped in a blanket and couldn't help but smile, remarking that Louise was surprisingly flexible. Blushing with embarrassment, Louise said she had totally misjudged him, thinking he wouldn't say such things in broad daylight. Robert just smirked in response and promised not to do it again, then suggested they check on Angelica. So the first thing they did upon arriving in the city was head to the restaurant. A while later, the car pulled up at the restaurant where, coincidentally, the girl was standing right by the entrance. Angelica immediately recognized Robert's car and, thrilled by his return, rushed to greet him. However, as soon as she saw he wasn't alone but with another girl, she froze in shock. Sensing the evil, ominous aura emanating from his friend, our hero instinctively became alert. Angelica was literally fuming with anger, and clenching her fists, she asked if he really brought his bride straight from his own home. Robert slowly backed away and pleaded for a chance to explain everything.